we've just been talking about prejudices and got to the delicate point of what some of our own prejudices are. Will you face up to any, Neve? You got any prejudices?
Well, basically, our prejudices against those who are prejudiced against me. But apart from that, lately I've acquired a strong feeling of nationalism. I'm very much interested in the total liberation of Africa. So that when I see some people who say that, well, most African states aren't ripe for independence, I have a strong ill feeling towards them.
Well, I think that prejudice is a part of human nature, and as a result I'm prejudiced too, and I admit that. However, I don't think that prejudice is necessarily based on a biased opinion, on ignorance, but I think that prejudice is also based on knowledge and on experience. For example, I lived in Tanganyika for quite a few years, and I'm prejudiced against Africans, not because of their color, but because of the difference in the cultural and economic status. Their living standards are so low, their housing and clothing facilities, their income, and on the whole, their attitudes of life are so different that, I mean, it's natural for me to be prejudiced.
And I'm prejudiced against people who are prejudiced, although I recently realized this, and I think I'm trying to overcome it by searching deeper and trying to find out why people are prejudiced and why they have feelings against another person, and then to go from there and discuss the idea and argue the point rather than the person, and not to be prejudiced against the person, but to disagree with their this one idea that they have.
Well, I looked up prejudice in the dictionary to see what my prejudices are, and found that prejudice is a preconceived idea based on ignorance. Well, according to that definition, I have millions of prejudices because 18 years old and with a very limited scope of experience, naturally, I am prejudiced against lots of things. But actually, I think quite a lot of what is passes for prejudice today is not so much that as a bias, which is very often, as Gus said, comes not with ignorance but with contact. And I am prejudiced, I think, like most other people, against everything which I think threatens the things which I hold dear to myself and to people like myself.
Well, Gus, you say that you are prejudiced against Africans in Tanganyika, not because of their color, but because of their economic and social position.
Exactly.
Well, in the same way, are you prejudiced against Europeans or white men who are in a lower class or in a bad economic situation?
Well, to some extent, yes, but it's not only a matter of prejudice, it's a matter of preference. I wouldn't like to associate with an African or with a white person whose living standards are low, not just because his living standards are low, but just because, I mean, conditions are such. It's not, I don't think it's just a matter of prejudice, but I think it's a kind of natural reaction of every human being.
Well, coming to the United States, I had the idea that, or that was the idea given to me by magazines, American magazines, and articles in American newspapers, that Americans have very strong racial prejudices. And what struck me was the fact that the most prejudiced people in America are people sitting in their homes in beautiful segregated areas, going to often private schools where there are no Negroes, people who have never met a Negro on equal social standing, and then form from, well, their own philanthropic ideas, the idea that all Southerners are rather backward and quite inferior to themselves, and people scoffing at the Southerners' problem and scoffing at problems in South Africa, whereas they know absolutely nothing about it. And that is, to me, a form of prejudice.
I think we've got to consider this question of race relations in both South Africa and America. First of all, I think there's a basic difference between the two problems, because if we take the case of America, the Negroes were brought over against their will. So, well, we may consider them as foreign to the land. At any rate, if they are foreign to the land, of course, when you go to a place and you find conditions unsuitable, most probably you will leave, you quit the place. But in their case, well, they were brought against their will. And so that's different in itself. And then when we go to South Africa, we have the Negroes staying in their place and the whites coming over.
Well, actually, I don't think that is quite fairly, if you consider the fact that the Negroes, or rather they are not Negroes but Bantu, in South Africa, had been arriving in South Africa at more or less the same time that the Europeans came in, who were, I must make this point very clearly, not colonists. The first whites who came to South Africa came there to establish a halfway station to the east. They had no intention of forming a colony, and then the people who were trekking north said in their manifesto that they sought a home for themselves and that they wished to remain in peaceful relations with tribes whom they found there. They did not wish to take away ground from them, but obtain that only by trade. And therefore, I think my position as a South African is so far different from that of Gus, who lived in Tanganyika for a long time, because Gus has been telling me that the Greeks realized, and all other people living in Tanganyika, that sooner or later they will have to leave and give the country over to Africans. Isn't that true?
Well, that's true. In Tanganyika, there are about 8 million Africans and 25,000 Europeans. And it's inevitable that when the Europeans and the white people on the whole are asked to leave Tanganyika, they'll just go out of it. I mean, because they don't insist it's their own country. Well, as you said, in South Africa, it's a different situation. The white people really believe that that is their own land and they will never give it up. But, however, I don't think that that is a good reason for the South African government to follow the policy which it follows now. I think that, well, it's true that the white claim this country, but I don't think that the black people should be denied the right to vote, the right to live equally with the white people, the right to own a house, and to own land, to get an education.
Since we're apparently going on to South African positions, I must first make it clear that I cannot discuss South African racial relations purely as regards to the prejudice point of view, because our problem is very largely an economic problem too. Now,
but even there, you were saying that the first people who came over were just interested in trade. But well, they came to meet indigenous people. And how did they treat them?
No, they didn't come to meet. They merely wanted to grow their crops and supply that to ships.
I know. They came to...
Okay, so I'm just going to run through the segments, starting with the title sequence, then we go into cross-Atlantic.
This is so scary.
That's the segment.
Jacopo doesn't have a microphone. The entire studio is on a slow boat in the Atlantic. Xhevat doesn't have enough internet to engineer. Julie is in the wrong time zone. Forrest seems a little too nice. And Fiamma does also. I don't really like the nice thing. And ugh, I didn't get that haircut. And I think that...
to
I
total
think we just gotta
campaign.
remember that people want, what people want is a show. We got to remember we're putting on a show and inject the whole thing with a sense of the vaudeville.
Is that what you're wearing?
Well, not anymore. Yeah.
La imagen por la cual vale la pena arriesgar la vida, sacrificarse hasta la muerte en los campos de batalla de todos los continentes del mundo.
Live from Berlin, it's the Committee Program, the chronicle of the world's most mysterious global political strategic entity. On today's show, Monday, the 3rd of May, Ellie, Mayo Hagan, Andre, Pagliarini, Nadia, Urbinati, Paolo Gerbaudo, Rachel Donadio, Robin Bell, and Fred Guerrier and Emmy Weinberg will help people with campaign problems. And of course featuring Julia Doubleday, our Deputy Director of Committee. And now, the hardest working man in the pop-up agitprop business, the 39th person in the Washington Business Journal's 2014 40 Under 40, our host and Director of Committee, Arun Chaudhary.
Oh my God, thank you so much, Jacopo, and I hear your breath there. I promise. Second show, main goal is to get the announcer a microphone. This is, we have goals. We may not be a squad, but we have goals. Thank you all so much for joining us here on the Committee Program. My name is Arun Chaudhary. I'm a political operative and creative from the United States. You may remember me from such campaigns as Barack Obama's 2008 and Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign. But generally, I've just been around in the trenches, working on a lot of political creative, ad making, script writing, this kind of thing. And in the last year, I've had the opportunity to take that into Europe, where my family moved and where I'm currently with the team here at Committee working on elections in Europe and trying to extend some of the knowledge we get from spending so much money on elections in America to our European comrades in hopes of counteracting the far-right nativist movement that we see pretty much unfettered sweeping across the nations with minor successes and major losses. So I want to thank Nomiki, Konst, I think all of us do, for giving us the opportunity to use her channel as a platform to try to develop some of this global solidarity. And look, you don't actually have to be that well familiar with Comrade Lenin's writings to know that many people consider the American left to be very specifically insular, not a part of the global movement. And there are real strong reasons for this. Obviously, as an entrenched superpower, America is so enmeshed with the organizations and the actual apparatuses that run the world that living inside it, it's like a fish tank, and we don't notice the water getting dirtier and dirtier. But when you take a look at it through the eyes of folks who aren't in America, and when you look at it through their politics and through their strivings, I think it reflects a lot on some very actionable things, some very simple things that we as the progressive community across the world can do together to advance the things that we believe in. And along the way, we are going to put on a good show. So thank you so much for joining us, everybody. And look, Jacopo, let's get our first segment ready. We need to get Ellie and Julie up, and let's start the show. Hey, this is actually the segment that I thought of first when I thought of the show, which is called Cross-Atlantic Crosstalk, which is where folks who I know, we get together and basically we gripe about the politics in our home countries under the guise of covering current events. What could be better? So with me on the inaugural edition, and who I hope will be our real regular core, is our own Julia Doubleday, of course, Deputy Director of Committee, and Ellie Mae O'Hagan, who is a political strategist and director of class. And we worked on the UK elections together back when we were young people, back when it all mattered. And this week saw not only the 100th day of Joe Biden's presidency, which is a Hallmark holiday invented by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, but also a sort of pseudo State of the Union in which he outlined some of his bigger goals. And so this was a real call to what the political scene will be in the US, and I think globally, as many folks are kind of pacing themselves against what the Biden administration does. I mean, Julie, I'd love to ask you if you watched the speech, what you thought of the speech, what was there and what wasn't there.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the risk of just turning off all of our target audience right away, I think that I've generally been more impressed with Biden than I expected to be. To be fair,
surprised.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I had super low expectations, so it wasn't basically doing anything that is at all progressive is going to be like a pretty big win for him in my book. But yeah, I mean, I've been impressed with what we've heard about the American Rescue Plan, which is a $1.9 trillion program. In that plan, we have direct aid, unemployment, nutrition assistance, pretty much just things that I wouldn't expect from a more centrist figurehead like him. I mean, I kind of feel like it goes to show that the work progressives have been doing in the last few years has been super effective. I think the same way that we've seen Schumer moving to the left out of fear of an eventual AOC primary, we also see that the centrist establishment understands that they have to make some concessions or they're not going to win another election. So
did you see that Bananas ad?
Sorry?
We'll have to look and analyze that. The Schumer non-ad where he's like running and he looks really bad.
No.
Well, I will show it to you later. Is
he going running and it says running for you? Because I feel like that's very common.
Probably. heard across the pond, Ellie, have these last 100 days and has this speech sort of been like a, hey, let's get our shit together and surprise people too moment vis-a-vis what Julie is talking about? Or, how does it play? I mean, I think we were talking before, and I do see a lot of I wish Keir would give it the old Joe try on UK Twitter.
Yeah, so the speech itself hasn't really had much of an impact because we're too busy watching our government sort of engage in shenanigans, let's say. But in general, over the last 100 days, obviously you have a section of the left here that is like, Biden is a centrist, he's done X, Y, Z, he'll never be acceptable to us. But actually, most progressives in this country, or sort of, who commentate on these things, I would say, are asking, why is Keir Starmer not doing what Joe Biden has done? Why is he not promising similar things? So I think our government stimulus package is a 60th of, equivalent of being a 60th of the size of America's stimulus package. So that's the sort of disparity that we're seeing at the moment. And I think the key frustration for the left here is that Keir Starmer has made his mark by alienating the left. As opposed to trying to sort of bring them in as part of a coalition, which from our vantage point, that looks like what Biden is trying to do. And I think the reason for that is because we did have a left leader for 4 years. And so in a sense, I think there was a sort of belief amongst the centrists of this country, although they would never phrase it this way themselves, that we'd got too big for our boots. And so it was sort of inconceivable that the left could be allowed to sort of, have a position, especially after we lost an election. So, so Keir Starmer is sort of, he has kind of turned away from the left. And it's partly what I just mentioned, but also it's perceived in this country that the group that swung the election are like, I guess, the equivalent of like a Wisconsin voter in America. So, somebody living in a post-industrial community who is very fiscally left-wing, but socially very conservative. And so Keir Starmer has been embracing social conservatism in order to win over that voter, but has sort of neglected the fact that they are also fiscally left-wing because he needs to sort of ingratiate himself with the establishment as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're talking about with the establishment feeling like the left got too big for its britches or whatever, that's definitely something that's happened here as well. But I think what we've seen with Biden is just his administration has much more of a willingness to incorporate the left's demands, I think just because they're more in touch with how urgent the need is to do that. And I do think it's probably more who is surrounding Biden. So the people working for him, the people close to him are really pushing him to do this more than it is, Biden having this massive change of heart. To a great degree, not all politicians, some of them are real ideologues, but a lot of politicians really rely on the people around them to decide how they feel about certain things. So to me, I feel like this administration, even though Biden himself was never further to the left of Obama, it seems like Biden's administration is to the left of what Obama's was. And that's really just the climate and a sign of the times and the fact that there are younger people working in this administration. But yeah, we've definitely seen that same kind of attitude here for sure. And I think that's something that really turned people off about the Clinton primary in 2016 is just that after she won, she could have done a lot of things to try and reach out to the left. And instead she picked Tim Kaine as her vice president, which I think was correctly interpreted as being kind of a fuck you to the left. Like, look, you're not going to get anything from us. Not even the most basic just gesture, because the vice president doesn't really have that much power.
Yeah, I think in this country, we've just learned that a guy called Simon Fletcher might be leaving Keir Starmer's team, and he worked for the Mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, who is sort of a bit disgraced now because he's made some anti-Semitic comments. But before he was disgraced, he was a sort of quite venerated left-wing Mayor of London. And then I should just mention for Simon Fletcher's sake that he didn't work for Ken when he made the comments that have sort of landed him in trouble. And then Simon Fletcher also worked for Jeremy Corbyn for a few years as well. So he was sort of seen as one of the left wingers of Keir Starmer's team. And there's rumours now that he's leaving, which means that Keir Starmer really won't be surrounded by that many left-wing people at all. He will mainly have people from the Labour right and from what we call in this country blue Labour, which is the faction of the Labour Party that believes that in order to win, you need to be sort of socially, fiscally left wing, but socially very conservative, and that you.
We call them blue dogs in the States.
Blue dog Democrats, yeah.
Blue dog Democrats.
Yeah. So very similar.
Yes. Very similar. Yeah. So that's really who he's surrounded by now.
Yeah, I think. Oh, go ahead.
Go on.
I was just gonna say, I think for people who don't work in politics, it really. The people who run and the people who win get so much attention, and they build such a personality cult around them that people really underestimate the influence that staffers have on electeds. Just because also electeds don't have time to do the kind of research that needs to be done around all these policies. So it really does matter who's surrounding an elected official.
Yeah, I mean, I run a very small organisation. But I run an organisation, and actually even just running an organisation, because you're the one that's ultimately responsible, you actually want to seek advice, you want to take advice all the time, because otherwise all of the decisions are just on you. And so I feel like being a president or being a prime minister or the leader of a political party must be like that times a million. And so I think it's completely logical that presidents, leaders of parties and so on will be guided by what they're hearing rather than just saying, I'm going to go this way. But I do think there is a sort of limit to that. So, so like someone like Tony Blair, for example, while he did sort of listen to his staff, he did have a very clear idea when he got into office of this is where I want to take the country. This is what I want to do. And it does, from our perspective in the UK, it does look like there are things about Biden that he really believes. So for example, he often says I'm a union man, and I think he sort of is a natural coalition builder. He doesn't seem to make political enemies that a lot. That doesn't seem to be something he seeks out. Whereas I think what's notable about Keir is that he really doesn't have that many politics. He really isn't very political himself, and I think I am not clear why he wants to become prime minister, and I'm not sure that he is either. And I think this is why we have in this country, Labour being at the moment quite incoherent, because there's no sort of ideology anchoring the leader and anchoring his project, and so it's just sort of veering all over the place depending on what the focus groups are saying.
Did you all get a chance to, sorry, I was in the internet ether there for a while. I hope nobody missed me too much. Did you all get a chance to talk about the communication styles? The wallpaper?
No.
Okay, what I think is interesting when we compare and contrast these two human beings politically is that, Joe Biden, take him behind the barn, beat him up, kind of sort of flirted with this kind of rough and tumble, back and forth, knife fighty online campaign for about 5 seconds during the election, and has dropped it hotter than, dropped it faster than the hottest potato to sort of do a more stately, grave statesman thing, the FDR thing, whatever you want to call it. Keir, who sort of, is otherwise sensible barrister type, has been doing a lot of this kind of meme stuff and fake links, and to the stunt today with the wallpaper because it's curtains for Boris. Where do you think that's coming from? Do you think it's getting traction? When, as you're saying, people are looking for the Labour Party to get more serious, is this the correct strategy for communication style?
So on the wallpaper thing, that's a real frustration of mine, because you probably heard that last week Boris Johnson, it was alleged by a number of media outlets, including the BBC, that Boris Johnson had said about coronavirus, let the bodies pile high.
Yeah.
And, that's obviously like a shocking thing for him to have said. And then it later emerged that he had sort of possibly, like, there's some suggestion that he might have broken the law in the funding that he's obtained to redo his flat in Downing Street. And that one of the suggestions is that he used a furniture company that was more posh than John Lewis, which is sort of like widely known as the kind of middle-class furniture shop. So Keir Starmer going to look at wallpaper was not him saying curtains for Boris. It was him going to look at wallpaper to be like, John Lewis isn't too good for me. Which was to me.
I thought it was picking out the wallpaper, which is what they say about someone who's assumed they've won, like they're picking out the wallpaper for the Oval Office. Yeah.
Well, and the fact that you thought that, I think, shows that it hasn't worked, right? The fact that you didn't get what he was trying to do. And like, you are more in tune with British politics than the average person in Britain, so it did. Yeah. So first of all, I don't think it worked. And second of all, I think making this a row about whether John Lewis is a posh shop or not is to me is much less important than talking about the things that our Prime Minister apparently said last week. So I think first of all, there's that element on that particular issue. I found that really frustrating. And in terms of, he's sort of trying to do these trolling things. And I think basically with Jeremy Corbyn, that really worked. A lot of the kind of memey, jokey stuff, would get like literally millions of views, as you remember, Arun. Mm-hmm. And like, and so I think maybe they're trying to replicate that. But I think one of the reasons why it worked with Jeremy is that Jeremy was extremely popular amongst young people. Like if you were like 34 or younger, you were like very likely to vote for Jeremy. And actually, before I came on this this show, I looked at Twitter and I saw that Sky News had published a story saying that Keir Starmer has basically like wiped out the support of young people since he became leader. That like now the support that they had for Labour is kind of now gone. And so I think then what you're left with is like this kind of internet trolling that feels really try hard, that feels really authentic, because it's a guy in his like 40s or 50s doing it to a bunch of other people who are like in their sort of mid 30s like and older. I say this as someone in my mid 30s, by the way. Like I'm not saying that's old, or at least I hope it's not. But like not young, not like youth. It's not youth culture. It just comes across like like Dr.
cringy, bad.
Oh no, for sure. We're not part of youth culture anymore. I just found out about TikTok celebrities. They're really rich. I don't know who any of them are. So we're old. We're old now.
It's terrifying how many followers they have and.
And I think they also understand like the message, like the actual joke, whether it's a troll or a joke or being funny, the actual joke has to have the message in it. I mean, I think that's what makes, as non-journalists, what we do sort of harder than satirists who just go and they can make fun of Boris Johnson's hair for half the time and the other half the time make fun of his policies. If you're actually trying to communicate politically with humor, it always has to be on message, and the joke has to be the message, and it can't just be a joke around the message. And I feel like
yeah, exactly. And you know this better than anyone, Arun, right? That you can't invent a persona that isn't there. Like, and so I'm not criticizing Keir Starmer for like trying to do inventive communications. I'm criticizing him for doing inventive communications that are so far removed from his public persona. And actually, he is he's got a kind of like lawyer dad vibe is his vibe. And actually, I feel like you could spin that into something. You could actually create that into something quite appealing. Like he's the sort of like he's the friendly dad who wears a fleece, but he's kind of reliable and like a nice.
He's your friend's dad, who you kind of like a bit more than yours, maybe.
Well, or like you have a little bit of a crush on if you're a girl or whatever, or a boy, and like. So I think. So it's like there is actually a positive version of Keir Starmer, but it has to be based on kind of the raw materials of Keir Starmer. It can't just be invented out of something that doesn't exist. And that I feel like is the problem with this whole like Keir Starmer is a sort of internet troll, which I guess is, or he's like irony Twitter, which really just isn't who he is. And I think that's why it's kind of falling flat.
Yeah, I think that's right. I do want to shift gears and talk a little bit about COVID. That's a thing that's happening. All three of us, I am in Germany, where we're behind you all, but, in the UK and the US, certainly vaccinations are getting to the point where end game policies are being made, right? Like, I know, Ellie, you can tell us about the UK, but restrictions are being pulled back with the idea that they never come back in again, right? So what does that look like on the ground?
Here?
Yeah.
So at the moment we're expecting. So basically, they release restrictions every 5 weeks, and they say that's to see how it affects cases, and then if they have to renege on their plan to release restrictions, then that'll give a week for businesses to prepare. So every 5 weeks, we're getting more and more restrictions released. So at the moment, we're allowed to hang out in groups of 6 outside. We're allowed to go to the gym. We're allowed to get our hair done, although I haven't had mine done yet, hence the scraping back. And we're and then in the next month, I think we'll be allowed to meet indoors in small numbers. And then in the end of June, we've been told that the restrictions will be released completely, and that'll be that will be done. However, our furlough scheme, which is the scheme that pays for people to sort of stay off work, so that they don't go into the office and mix, so that the government pays people's wages, basically. That has actually been extended to the end of September, which kind of suggests to me that the government is expecting some kind of disruption beyond June. And then also Boris Johnson and SAGE, which is our sort of committee of scientific advisors, have said that we should expect a third wave as well. So at the moment, it feels kind of quite confusing about what's going on here, because our vaccination program is pretty successful, which, by the way, for an American audience, is thanks to our public healthcare system and not the government. And so that is going really well, and cases aren't rising, but it is. I'm unsure about what the rest of this year is going to look like for us.
Yeah, and I think the scary thing is if no one's sure if they're wearing their mask, is it okay? I'm using a bad metaphor because masks, but on the airplane wearing their masks, should they be helping the child next to them? And there's a lot of countries who do not have the same means who are not able to procure vaccines. And so, Julie, how do you see the politics of this playing out between the global north and the global south as the global north emerges?
Right. So, I think you're touching on this really massive issue that, certainly is being discussed on the left quite a lot, but hasn't really broken through too much into the mainstream press. I've seen articles about it here and there, but I think it needs to be a much bigger issue. The issue of the TRIPS waiver, and the ability for other countries to access our intellectual property, the IP of these pharmaceutical companies. In terms of how I think it's going to play out, I think there is a lot of pressure from the left on Biden right now. I know that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, a lot of other prominent progressives are pressing him on this. But there's also, of course, the pushback from Big Pharma, from the Gates Foundation, about why we can't waive IP rights. And there's a lot of arguments. There are a lot of arguments going around that I think the left needs to be aware of and to be able to debunk them. The Gates Foundation, most of what the Gates Foundation does, it has this really undemocratic stranglehold on global health in a lot of developing countries, even though Bill Gates was never elected to anything. Just because he's this rich white man, he is able to set global health policy basically all over the world. And his argument is that, look, even if we waive the IP rights at this point, it's too late, essentially. It's too late. It's not really going to make a difference, and these countries aren't going to be able to make this vaccine because they don't have the resources to do it. So, there's a couple... It's
not going to make a difference. Let's try it anyway.
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack in that. One of the things I think should be acknowledged is that, in the event that there aren't the resources to manufacture vaccines in different countries, we should obviously assist with getting them the resources to be able to do that, not just for this vaccine, but also for, having a future global public health policy that serves us all and that allows us to fight the next pandemic as quickly as possible. I mean, the idea that we don't have this infrastructure, so let's not build it. It's like, say, if before we built the national highway system, we were like, look, there's no highway, so how am I going to drive out there? Well, we got to build it. Like, what you're saying is there's an urgent need for that thing, and it doesn't exist yet, so we should make sure that is a thing, if in fact that's the case, that these countries can't manufacture this drug. Of course, there's also the reality that there are parts of the world where they could be manufacturing this if they did have access to that ID. So there's a racism inside of a colonialism, inside of an imperialism, and then just tie it up with a bow. And that's pretty much everything.
Tied up with the bow of liberalism. I'm sorry, I have to say it just because it's I don't want to quote her wrong. There was a tweet which was look, all you yoginis who love India, what have you done for someone in India today?
Oh yeah, don't get me started about
true. So Ellie, the progressive community, the diverse progressive community of the UK, which especially has a large Indian population, what is going on inside the community politically? And I don't mean, of course, are there associations, sending help? Of course there are. I mean specifically on the political left.
So from what I can see, and there may be people on the UK left who will disagree with me, but from what I can see, we are donating to charities there, and there's a campaign called Just Treatment, which I think is calling for the sort of patents to be,
public pressure campaign. Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, but it's not. So I think one of the contexts here is that Britain, has got a sort of history of giving a lot in international aid, which, by the way, it has cut massively in recent years. But it still kind of rides on that reputation. So, we've sort of pledged some vaccines, and then there's this kind of idea that we're doing our bit. So there's a lot of, oh God, it's awful, sort of reactions. But there isn't really a widespread mainstream campaign to give vaccines.
There's a policy problem that can actually be fixed.
Yeah, go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think this sort of gets to the heart of what we want to do with the show as well, is just that, the left in the US and maybe in the UK, a lot of the left, I think, in the developed world, there's just not as much insight into how these decisions that are made by global bodies affect us and affect other countries, and how we're playing into those decisions or how we're benefiting from those decisions. So I think it's really important that we draw these lines and connect these dots, even just simply saying look, the vast majority of people getting vaccinated right now or in the so-called developed countries in the West, in majority white areas, majority white countries. I mean, if you need to draw a direct line between how capitalism is related to neocolonialism, is related to racism, this is a great example. I mean, it doesn't get any more clear than this when it's really quite clear how racially stratified access to the vaccine is.
Yeah, and to me, it's just so sinister that, what you were saying with the Bill Gates thing, where it's it's just not going to work. And because he's Bill Gates, people are okay, so let's not try. And you're like, what do you mean? This is horrific. Hard. I mean, we've all seen it's not a spike what's happening. I mean, and anything else we've seen.
Quite frankly, the Gates Foundation is a big defender of IP in all situations. So this isn't specific to this. It's not like he's just saying it about this one thing.
Yeah, they're not changing their tune.
They've always been defenders of intellectual property and patent rights. It's really crucial to Bill Gates's fortune and a lot of the work they do. So I think if you go back actually to 80s and 90s, there was a similar discussion where it was, should other people be able to manufacture generic AIDS drugs? And it was the same argument. It was well, they're not going to be able to do that. And it wasn't true. It wasn't true at all. Now they're much, much, much cheaper than they were 10, 20 years ago. Shouldn't have taken that long. And right now, of course, we're hearing that a lot of people won't have access to the vaccine to maybe 2024, maybe later. I think people also need to understand that presents a public health threat to the entire world. To allow the virus to keep mutating it's going to come back and bite you on the ass.
Triple mutated.
It'll be back. Yeah. The triple mutant strains that are already out there. So to just say, well, we'll get around to vaccinating them in 3 or 4 years, it's not just really cruel, it's also just really atrocious public health advice.
Next week, let's add an Indian journalist into the roundtable and actually hear about what they think folks could do, so maybe we can even push people in the right direction. Because yeah, of course, charity is good, charity is important, but this is like a systemic policy thing. And I wish there was an organization, maybe there will be, but there should be something called the next pandemic or whatever, that right now is already planning on all the things that should be planned, because as far as I can tell, looking around everywhere around the world, ain't nobody really thinking about it and planning that hard.
Right. No, where this is, again, I think, Naomi Klein has talked a lot about disaster capitalism. And I think under these capitalist regimes, everything is about next quarter and nothing is about next year. And it's certainly not about 5 years down the road. I mean, everything is about how do we make money right now. And that's also, why we saw this just absurdly bad response to the first wave. Everyone was like, oh, well, we can't shut down the economy. If we had just shut down the economy a year ago, shut down the economy, shut down everything for 8 weeks, 10 weeks, we would have been back to normal. We could have done what Vietnam did or what parts of China did, had a very intense lockdown, and then controlled the spread. Instead,
we just don't have this. I got to be honest with you. Just watching the way the U.S.
No, you're absolutely correct.
The UK, Ellie, I'll give you the last word on this, but what do you think? Just here's a hypothetical, random. What will be different during the next pandemic in the UK versus this time around? Well, will there be less pressure to put cuts on the NHS? What is the actual?
Well, I think a bit that will depend a lot on who's in government, I think. But I think generally speaking that there will be the government, I think, will shut down sooner, because if you remember here, we had this bizarre 2 weeks where the government was like, oh, we just need to let everybody get coronavirus, but just a bit slower.
I do remember that, yeah.
Yeah, so we just need to build up herd immunity. So, you had Boris Johnson on the morning shows saying, oh, we just need to, we're just going to take it on the chin, and
he did his level best.
yeah, I know. And then so we wasted. We had people from Italy, doctors in Italy being locked down now. You have 2 weeks on us. You need to do it now. And we just ignored that and wasted those 2 weeks. And then we've ended up with some of the worst, one of the worst situations in the world, obviously except for India and some countries in Latin America and the United States on some metrics. But yeah, I mean, so I think that there'll be an expectation that we would lock down straight away without sort of dithering around with herd immunity. I think that's it. I mean, I'm really it really depends on who's in government. But if it's still this government, I don't think that there's going to be many changes to how we've dealt with it, because they are ultimately the reason why we've dealt with the pandemic the way that we have, which is to sort of protect salaried workers and throw a lot of people to the wolves. Is ideological, because our government doesn't really believe that the purpose of government is to step in. They don't like doing that, and I think
absolutely
they'll try hard not to do that the next time as well. And so for all of his sins, that's why I would like Keir Starmer to be our next prime minister, because
oh yeah, we're going to tell you from the United States of Biden, it's better that way,
yeah,
it's a little better. It is
a little better. It's a little better.
Little better.
Yeah.
Cool, y'all. Thank you so much for coming on. And next week, can we do this next week?
We can do it next week.
Yeah.
We can do it next week.
Okay,
we'll do it next week.
Ciao, y'all.
Ciao.
Bye.
La imagen por la cual vale la pena arriesgar la vida, sacrificarse hasta la muerte en los campos de batalla de todos los continentes del mundo.
First deep dive, Brazil. Should be good. Andre, what's his name?
Pagliarini.
Pagliarini. Are you sure the G is pronounced like a G and it's not Pagliarini like it was Italian?
It's definitely not whatever you said, but I think it's Pagliarini.
It's important to get everybody right, Actually, in fact, when I was at the White House, a lot of people don't know, it was one of my jobs when we were taping to be like, you said that wrong, sir. And in fact, one time we were doing the FIFA taping. You don't want me to tell
I don't know more Obama stories, okay?
Okay.
And don't do it on the air either. Everyone knows you worked for Obama.
Hey, and welcome back to the committee program. Our next segment is a thing we call Deep Dive, where we do a dive, but make it deep. So talk a little bit more about something than you normally hear about. And to introduce our first topic on our first Deep Dive is our own Julia Doubleday.
Thank you, Arun. I have with us today Andre Pagliarini. He is a lecturer of history and Latin American studies at Dartmouth University. He's also working on a manuscript for a book about nationalism in Brazil. And he's going to help us understand the current situation in Brazil, from President Bolsonaro's botched COVID-19 response to the return of former President Lula da Silva as a presidential challenger in next year's election. We're also going to be discussing the recent upheaval in President Bolsonaro's cabinet after he replaced many of his ministers amidst concern about his growing authoritarianism. So thank you so much, Andre, for being with us here today.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here talking with you guys.
Awesome. So first we want to delve into this cabinet overhaul. So can you tell us a little bit about, who left, who resigned, what was kind of the impetus for this slew of resignations, and why is it making a lot of people nervous about President Bolsonaro?
Yeah, so the situation in Brazil has gotten to a point where a few weeks ago, basically in very simple terms, something had to give. I think the Bolsonaro government, those close to him, sensed that he needed to make some kind of shift to suggest that he was listening to critics and allies who said, look, you got to do something differently here. The Speaker of the House, of the lower chamber of Congress, gave a speech where he basically said, in kind of oblique terms, that there are remedies Congress could take. Some of them are painful, some of them are lethal, which many interpreted as a reference to impeachment, if Bolsonaro did not do something to suggest that he gets it, he understands. So maybe the most prominent thing he did was fire his foreign minister, who was widely blamed for the disastrous situation in Brazil regarding COVID, because Brazil is importing, to the extent that there are vaccines in Brazil and there are shortages, Brazil still depends on shipments from abroad. So it did not seem like the foreign minister at the time, this guy named Ernesto Araújo, was putting the most diplomatic efforts, the best efforts forward to acquire the necessary materials. In fact, quite the opposite. This is a guy who, over the course of his tenure, and he had been there since the beginning, so 2019, has picked fights with those he deems responsible for what he called the globalist agenda. He's questioned the provenance of the coronavirus, the China virus, and using that kind of language and globalism. And so this is a guy who really alienated a lot of people that Brazil, when the coronavirus and the pandemic struck, needed help, needed international collaboration. And this is a guy who did a lot to really, I think, create a negative perception of Brazil around the world. So he's gone. He was fired. Replaced with someone who was deemed to be much more of not quite a technocrat, but a much more sort of sober diplomat, someone who had been in the ceremonial office of Brazil's foreign service, someone who could try to reset Brazil's relationships with these really important countries. So that was maybe the most prominent one.
I mean, it seems
Other than
like,
that, though,
Brazil has been, and the regime has managed to get both the initial response and the vaccination response wrong, while usually you get to do one or the other. Here in Germany, we can test and trace the hell out of anything. We don't necessarily vaccinate that great. America, couldn't test for crap, but can vaccinate just vast swaths of humans quickly. What's going on?
Yeah, and it gets to this point about the pandemic and Bolsonaro's handling of it, which is, I think, raised international concern, consternation, but also curiosity around the world. It's like, what explains this really terrible response to the pandemic? I think it comes down to a few things. One of them is really, and it almost sounds, silly, but I think there is this kind of deep unwillingness on Bolsonaro's part to grapple with the vulnerability that everyone around the world feels with the pandemic, right? He's basically said, almost verbatim, that the country needs to kind of suck it up and get through it and get back to work. He said literally today that the country cannot stop. He called governors who are instituting lockdowns in their states, pseudo governors. He said, who are trying to implement little dictatorships in their own states. So I think it's this sense of kind of macho, unwillingness to recognize vulnerability, combined with this idea that the major promise of the Bolsonaro candidacy when he was running in 2018 was never mind the rhetoric of anti-minority and misogynistic and racist. His main thing was going to be this liberalizing of economic reforms to lower the size of the state, economic reforms. And so, in other words, the economy can't stop. Because if the economy goes, the whole kind of bargain that he made, I think, with the electorate goes with it. And so those two together have been this really kind of cocktail of denialism, if you will, that has put Brazil, in this horrible, horrible predicament.
I think that...
And so
Oh, go ahead.
Well, just to go back to what, it's related to this, the cabinet shakeup from a few weeks ago, there was some real sense there, and we still haven't really gotten the full story, that the military is potentially trying to sort of extricate itself from this administration, because they bet heavily on Bolsonaro in 2018, and there's at this point more military figures across the government in roles of authority across the administration than there have been since the military regime ended in the 1980s. And so he fired his Minister of Defense, and the three heads of the branches resigned or were fired in protest. Again, we don't really know the full story, but it suggests, and I've argued this at the time, that Bolsonaro is sort of steeling himself for something. I mean, it seems like there are moves being made by him and those close to him to looking ahead to the re-election next year to potentially, and it's very preliminary at this point, but to potentially, if he doesn't win, right, to question the results.
This is sounding very
so
familiar.
It looks like he wants exactly. It looks like he wants to have people he can count on in these key positions.
Right.
Should it come to that?
Yeah, it's interesting what you how you were speaking about those initial resignations, because my understanding was really that Bolsonaro was potentially isolating himself even more, from the world and from the political establishment. It sounds like the firing of this diplomat, who I know you've referred to as the world's worst diplomat, it sounds like that actually was maybe a move to bring himself more back into the fold of the establishment. But my understanding is that when the heads of the military were stepping down, there basically was a public perception of a feud between them and Bolsonaro, and that there was this sort of shot at him about how the army is always going to be independent from politics. Like they were speaking about sort of like this veiled shot at him that, we're not going to just do whatever an administration tells us to do. We are independent. This isn't a military state.
Right.
So it's interesting that it sounds like maybe he's sort of scrambling and just throwing everything at the wall, and all of that may come back to Lula re-entering the fold.
Yeah, well, one thing I would say that is telling, though, about the cabinet ministers that he did fire and those he retained is, I think we can think of it as, there's an expression in Portuguese, maybe in English too, where he's cutting the finger to save the hand.
Mm-hmm.
So he fired the foreign minister, who by all accounts was, he felt very attached to. It was a guy who really, they were in sync in terms of the kind of conspiratorial worldview and all that. But he fired him. Another minister, though, who, there are widespread demands that he be fired as well, is the Minister of the Environment, this guy named Ricardo Salles, who, in my view, the fact that this guy is still in the cabinet suggests a sort of fundamental unseriousness about reining in deforestation and all of that, because Salles, again, almost in his own words, sees the economic development of the Amazon as a priority, meaning, economic opportunities, deforestation, mining, all of that stuff, right? And so I think what we saw was it got to a point with the foreign minister, Araújo, that really senators were, there was no more room to deny and to kind of shift and to move around. So I think Bolsonaro made the tactical decision to, let him go. But meanwhile, keeping this other guy who's equally as dangerous, equally as damaging, I think, to Brazil's long-term, standing in the world in place. And so basically, just to wrap up this point, there are multiple narratives, I think, emerging about Brazil's political situation right now. One of them is that the military is sort of getting tired of its association with this administration because it's starting to make the institution of the armed forces look bad. And so they're trying to kind of step back. On the other hand, people say, sort of not so fast, right? That the military sanctioning Bolsonaro in 2018 gave him a lot of credibility. It helped him, no doubt, electorally. And they're still occupying these positions across the federal government. They don't get to sort of now say, well, we had nothing to do with this. This is not our problem. That the military is already deeply, deeply tarnished, and that damage is going to take a while to be undone. So
are these the swing voters, though? Like, are these the equivalent of Trump's suburban, whatever, people who thought it was okay to go with Bolsonaro because the army says it's okay, and in the past they've sort of, been in a parochial way, kind of, are betters and have taken care of things. Is he losing some of those people? Who is he keeping and who is he losing in the face of this incompetence and, other sort of evil doing, for lack of a better term?
That's a great question, because, I think historians are going to be debating for years and years to come how this guy, who he didn't really come out of nowhere. He had been a congressman for several, for decades, but he really, Brazil, even more so than the United States, to be a serious contender for the presidency, you need to have a major party. Usually, this is traditionally how it's been since democracy returned in the 80s. Major party, because being part of a major party gives you television time. There are these allotted campaign slots during the campaign. And if you're the size of your representation in Congress dictates the amount of time you get on TV. So the thing is to be a part of a major party, and you negotiate with smaller parties to put together all this television time. Bolsonaro upends that completely. He's from a very small party. He doesn't rely on television advertising. He's much stronger on social media. In fact, in a way, revolutionary, because never before in the history of Brazil had someone come from sort of out of nowhere politically to win. And I think, to your question, there's a few ways that he signals credibility, aside from sort of young male supporters who call him, mito, the myth, like he's this mythical figure on the social media. So that was captive early on. But then how do you signal, if you're Bolsonaro, how do you signal a broader kind of credibility? Part of that, I would say, two major points. One that you raise is the military, which is this. Even progressives and those on the center, left, and left will say that one of the major shortcomings of the Workers' Party years in power, center-left Workers' Party is in power from 2003 to 2016, is that they failed to adequately handle the question of public security. That there are, all kinds of really important social programs that they implemented, all this other stuff. But, people in poor communities, for example, you feel unsafe in a lot of cases. And so this was a person, Bolsonaro, who was able to capitalize on that. Like, look, nothing's worked. The only way to deal with these, bad guys and crooks is to put a bullet in their heads. This is why I think the comparison with Duterte in the Philippines is often made. Because it's this idea of like, there's nothing else works. We just have to kill these bad guys. And the military, I think, they don't endorse Bolsonaro openly, but, his vice president is a general. It's no secret who the military, wants to win. And I think that signals that, look, this isn't just some crazy guy. It's a guy who has an in with the armed forces. They're going to help, logistically come up with the plans and all this. So it signals, I think, a kind of, notion that this isn't just a crazy zealot, Bolsonaro, that he actually does have an in with the armed forces. And so people who might gravitate towards this issue of public security, yeah, that really is a problem. Maybe it is good to have a candidate there with, really deep links to the armed forces, as opposed to, just as a, counterexample, former President Dilma Rousseff, who had taken up arms against the military regime in the past, and who, there was always tension between her and the armed forces. So that's one thing. The other major gesture I think he made to signal credibility was by naming his finance minister early on, this guy named Paulo Guedes, who is literally a Chicago boy, he founded a major bank in Brazil. And so Bolsonaro had never, economic policy during his time in Congress had never been his forte. He's, frankly, not that interested in matters of, macroeconomics, things like that. But this guy, Paulo Guedes, said, matters of economy, talk to Paulo Guedes. And his whole thing, right, is reducing the size of the state, privatizing state industries. He implemented a pension reform system that critics say really hurts poor and working class people. But, I know this anecdotally, but also in the reporting, that a lot of people who preferred a sort of more moderate center-right candidacy in 2018, they said, well, Bolsonaro might be crazy, but Paulo Guedes, this guy, he's a serious, economic guy. Maybe we do need someone like that to institute the reforms that Brazil has long needed under, the leftist parties like, the PT and arguably they would say before that, these liberalizing reforms never happened. Maybe now is our chance. So they held their nose and voted for Bolsonaro. So those two, I think, are the major steps that he took to signal credibility. And the major storyline for next year, as he goes into re-election, is to what extent he can continue to placate these two different constituencies.
I mean, I know that we're certainly not the first to compare Bolsonaro to Trump in the U.S., but it sounds like from what you're talking about, we're going to see this like very similar response to him as he's running for re-election, the same sort of response we got to Trump, which is that, the COVID response was so botched and he became so isolated that even people who sort of said, okay, well, I don't think Trump totally represents how I feel about the Republican Party, but he's wildly popular and I may not like every crazy thing he says, but I'm going to vote for him. It seems like a lot of those people actually did come over and either vote for Joe Biden or sit it out. Not to understate the popularity that Trump still had. And I think that you've also spoken to Bolsonaro still has this sort of floor of support. He's still going to get 30% of the vote no matter what. So I guess, I'm wondering to what degree that relationship between Trump and Bolsonaro may also led to him becoming more isolated on the world stage after Trump lost. Because, one thing I noticed is it seems like they sort of just put all their eggs in the Trump basket, the Bolsonaro administration. It's like whenever they had to choose between Trump's doing one thing, the international community disagrees, they're very much just sort of staying on America's side. And now with Biden in office, I'm curious to what degree that's sort of led to this further isolation of the administration.
Yeah, and there's a very clear issue in which this dynamic is playing out, which is, the climate summit that was just, before last weekend, I think Thursday and Friday, I believe. This idea of should the Biden administration negotiate with Bolsonaro directly regarding conservation efforts? Now, there were a whole host of civil society organizations, activist groups, both in Brazil, but also in the United States, and really everywhere, saying, don't negotiate, don't give money to this administration, because the Bolsonaro government, the environment minister I mentioned earlier, Ricardo Salles, basically said Brazil could cut deforestation by 40% in 1 year for $1 billion. Now,
give us the money.
Given the track record, given the track record of this administration, there's no real reason to think that all of a sudden they're going to, well, now we care. Now, because they've been denying that deforestation is an issue this whole time.
What do you think motivated?
So there's this question of,
what do you think motivated this sudden sort of about face? Like, aside from just, maybe getting $1 billion check, like, did this also sort of come from Lula re-entering the political scene?
I think, that's part of it. I think it's a concession to the reality that things are changing, right? It's not 2018 anymore. Mm-hmm. That Trump is gone, Lula is back. And that, again, just like when he let the foreign minister go, as I mentioned earlier, it's a gesture. It's a way of saying, we get it, we hear you, and all of that. The question is, should you reward that opening that the Bolsonaro administration seems to be making? And by the way, already we know that it was just words, because Bolsonaro's new budget, approved over the weekend, actually cuts investment in the enforcement of the Amazon, which he promised to actually double during his speech. So in other words, the people who said it was just going to be empty talk have sort of already been vindicated.
Right.
But the fundamental debate is, should you engage with this administration, or should activists and all that continue to isolate him on the world stage? Because at this point, the thinking goes, if you do negotiate with him, if you do give him a win, as it were, you might be strengthening his hand ahead of next year. So it might actually,
just enough juice to get him over the finish line, right?
Exactly.
Right. Well, I mean, even the fact that he's attempting a pivot, I would say, means that he understands much better than Trump did that he's actually in trouble. I think Trump, until the very end, was pretty confident that he was going to win, and also after he lost, he was still confident that he had won. So,
but you're right. I mean, thinking about this as we're talking, it reminds me a little bit of like when Trump would wear a mask, and then because like it sounds like he had just been told you need.
Yeah, it kind of just changed every day. Yeah, he couldn't really commit to the pivot.
That's very much Bolsonaro, where he'll say one thing, and it sounds like he's pulling teeth to get to say no. The Amazon is in danger. We're gonna do all we can. And the next day he says, it's just a totally different line. And so in that sense, that does remind me of Trump.
It's like the rock star who has to smoke until they die because they wrote the song "Smoke Until I Die."
Because they're too deeply invested, right?
Just to be nakedly political about this, and I know a lot of folks listening will, have feelings about Lula as an exciting figure on the global progressive left. Bolsonaro, his team, they do the thing that Republicans do so well, the right wing do, which is accusing other people of doing whatever they're doing and making it stick effectively. So, if corruption is their thing, they very effectively use that as the brush that they have painted the PT with not just Lula, of course, Juma, everyone has their turn in the sun. To what extent does the reversal on Lula give him an extra boost of credibility coming into this election? And they lied about me, the bastards. And how much is it he still has this damage of corruption, and Bolsonaro gets to keep some of those people forever because they're just like, yeah, but those guys are crooks.
And let me piggyback on that as well and say let's get some context about Operation Car Wash and just give people a little bit of a rundown of what happened to Lula and what has more recently happened with those convictions being tossed out.
Yeah. So I'll just kind of link those two really quickly. So basically, Operation Car Wash is this long-running investigation, began officially in 2014, into these huge amounts of money being siphoned off from Brazil's state-owned oil company, Petrobras, which found basically that there was money being diverted at almost every level of government, almost every political party, nobody is getting away from these allegations, this investigation, sort of unscathed, at least. Institutionally, parties, not every individual, but, parties and things like that. Over the course of, a few years of the investigation, it becomes clear to many observers that while the corruption being revealed is systemic, the only party that seems to really be hurt and really, crippled by the allegations is the Workers' Party. Now, trying to be as sort of fair as possible about the allegations, one could say that's because the PT, the Workers' Party, was in charge, ran the federal government for 13 years. So it might make sense that they're most, sort of enmeshed in all of this. But what ends up happening is that Lula is the main, it's quickly apparent he's the main big fish that they're sort of after. Because, being able to implicate him in this corruption would really be a signal. This is the argument. This is the logic that things have changed in Brazil. That there is no more elite impunity. We've even bagged a former president. Like, this is a big deal. long story short, Lula gets arrested on charges of money laundering for this duplex apartment, this small apartment in a beachside town in Santos, in the state of São Paulo. The charges, this is what ultimately gets the charges undone, is that the crime is very loosely linked to Petrobras, to Operation Car Wash. And yet, Lula gets sentenced for corruption, for money laundering, that he supposedly received this apartment as sort of illicit payment for kickbacks and all of that. Now, what we now know is that the judge overseeing those cases was in cahoots with the prosecution. That he was literally sort of texting behind the defense's back, suggesting lines.
It's the good
questioning.
Stuff. It's the real corruption,
It's
the pure.
And that's. No, you raise a really interesting point, because I've had this conversation with anti-Lula friends and family, which is, is that not corruption? So I think Car Wash really instilled this idea in Brazilian political discourse that what corruption means is money being siphoned off from state institutions. That's it. That's corruption. Well, Bolsonaro is, attempted to change the head of the Brazilian federal police, the equivalent of the FBI, in the state of Rio. Why? Because his son is under indictment, under investigation. Is that not corruption? Right? So I think part of the damage that Operation Car Wash has done, and some would argue it's done a lot of good, but ultimately one of the bad things I think it's done is to define sort of malfeasance so narrowly that now there isn't really a vocabulary to talk about the misdeeds in a lot of ways of what Bolsonaro was doing and all these other parties as well.
Right. And I know... I was just going to say, my understanding as well is that, so when the judge was prosecuting this case, Lula was sent to jail. He had been the front runner in the presidential election. Bolsonaro ends up winning against the man that was sent in to replace Lula on the ticket. Mm-hmm. And then the judge was given a role in that administration. So there was this sort of obvious, immediate quid pro quo happening, which I think really started to get people upset about, the malfeasance that may have been going on.
I mean, even people who supported Operation Car Wash, who thought the judge in the case, Sergio Moro, was a hero, even a lot of them said, well, it does seem unseemly that this is the guy
right.
who...
Even if you aren't corrupt, why would you even take this position, right?
It's the appearance, of corruption, that he goes on to join the administration of the man who was the most benefited by his decision to lock up Lula. So now, to Arun's question about how this is playing out right now.
Yeah, how sticky.
Many sort of anti-Lula people will say, well, he's not innocent. He hasn't been absolved. It's just that there was this technicality of the judge that, it's a technicality. Now, to that, one might say, well, no, he is innocent because one is innocent until proven guilty. And so the case was deemed tainted by a biased judge. And so, the Lula has to be given the same benefit of the doubt as anybody else. And you asked about the sort of the taint of corruption. Is he going to be marred by this? Polling indicates either, there's a few ways to read it. Lula leads in most instances in the first round and leads or is really competitive with Bolsonaro in the second round in most polls. Either that means most people are willing to forgive and they don't care, about the charges, the clouds hanging over Lula, because they think back to his years in power, whatever he was doing, it was better than this, right? He was more capable of conducting himself in a dignified manner with the other parties and all this stuff. So it's either that, or they believe that there was a conspiracy against Lula to knock him out of the running that has now been reversed, and rightfully so. So again, it might be too soon to know exactly which one of those is happening, but there's no doubt that the political ground in Brazil has shifted incredibly in just a few years. And it's a large part to do with these revelations that came out published by The Intercept in Brazil, who received thousands of hacked conversations between the judge and the prosecutors. Without that evidence, I think we would be in a very different place. So it suggests like how fluid the situation is, how quickly things can change. Right now, Lula is back in the running. He seems to be vindicated. He seems really thrilled to be back in the race. I mean, he's going after Bolsonaro with gusto, and I do think Bolsonaro is scared. He's shaken by this, so it's forcing some of the adaptations we were talking about earlier from his part.
Yeah, and that leads really well into my next question, which is essentially just, what can we expect from this sort of showdown between these two titans of Brazilian politics? I mean, I assume that next year's election is likely going to be one of the most exciting and most watched elections globally. So what do you sort of foresee, not just in terms of who's likely to win, but in terms of how these two are going to approach the campaign? Especially in light of the COVID crisis?
There's an attempt right now among some in the center-right to portray Lula and Bolsonaro as mirror opposites of each other. That, Lula is just as far from the center as is Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro is a far right, Lula is far left. Judging from the polling, most people don't seem to buy that, right? That Lula is some kind of radical in the way that Bolsonaro, just his political style suggests that he's kind of out there on the margins. He alienates a lot of people. He's rude and crude and crass. Lula, I mean, he has this, decades of experience in the labor movement and then building a party and being president, where some fault him for this, but he knows how to schmooze. He knows how to build bridges. He knows how to bring people together. Already he's saying quite clearly, we need to talk to the center. We need to talk to center-right. We need to talk to people who might have voted for Bolsonaro last time. We need to talk to people who might have voted to impeach Dilma in 2016, if it means defeating Bolsonaro. So this is one of the things that is unique about Lula, that in 2018, his former Minister of Education, Fernando Haddad, ran in his stead, who just, nobody can match the kind of the magic that Lula has. And I say that without trying to kind of it's nothing mystical. It's just that he is one of the great political talents of world politics, I think, of the 20th century. And so if anybody can build a coalition large enough to take on Bolsonaro, and even broader than Bolsonaro, it's this sense of anti-PT anger. And the bet that I think Lula's candidacy will be making next year is that anti-PT sentiment, antipetismo as the Brazilian term, has dissipated, has cooled enough after the disaster of Bolsonaro's governance. Right now, he seems to be on pretty solid footing to make that bet, given the polls. Now, there is an attempt, as I mentioned, to kind of, no, these guys are basically the same. They're radicals. We need a third way. So, if the major fight right now is between Bolsonaro,
we never like the third way.
Right. So this is kind of like the second tier battle that's happening right now, is to decide who might that person be, and if they're able to narrow it to one. Because Brazil, there's dozens of parties, right? Usually, since the return of democracy in the 80s, the runoff has been the PT and the PSDB, the sort of center-right party of former President Fernando Henrique. That changes with Bolsonaro, who is a kind of far right against the center-left. Now, among the center, right now, I mean, as we speak, these parties are negotiating to try to come to some kind of consensus that there would be just one name, because otherwise there's just too many, and they get maybe 5%, 4%, and they can't challenge these two behemoths. So these are two things to watch: is who is going to emerge from these negotiations on the lower level. These are smaller parties. They don't have as big names, but, they're not nobodies, right? The governor of the state of São Paulo, who supported Bolsonaro in 2018, but is now a vehement opponent, he wants to run for president. Ciro Gomes, who served in Lula's administration, he's definitely running. It's just a question of how many people can he get on his side. So that's one storyline to sort of watch. The other is sort of the main event is what happens with Bolsonaro, right? Is he going to continue this kind of slow motion implosion that seems to be happening? Maybe. and on the left, the Workers' Party. I mean, there are some people, if you look at Lula's candidacy, who say he actually might not end up running, that he might just be trying to hold on to as much political capital as he can until the last minute and then pass it off.
That
so
doesn't
will
sound
he
like
run?
any politician in the history of anywhere has ever done
Right.
any time. But anyway, we can
Exactly.
put our bets down
They're not
on
that humble.
No, because
yeah.
he spent 580 days in jail. He wants to be back in the
he's
presidential
hungry.
palace.
He looks hungry.
Right?
He looks hungry.
Yeah.
He looks mad. And that's good. That's the way we want him looking. I think that's okay.
No, and after his conviction was overturned and all this, Lula gave this wonderful speech, and I say that without like being a partisan, but just even critics said, "Man, that's what a president sounds like," right? Because he had this kind of righteous indignation about the way the pandemic is being handled in Brazil. He said, Brazil has no government right now. That this, what is this government doing? He talked about building bridges with the center, building bridges with people who disagree with you, talking about science, and basically hitting everything that a president should be saying in a moment like this. That Bolsonaro, literally, it's almost comical. Lula in this speech said, Bolsonaro doesn't believe the earth is round. He's anti-science. That afternoon, Bolsonaro did a Facebook Live event, and he never before had this, but this time he had a globe on his desk to suggest that, I know the
I know about that.
Yeah, exactly. And so it was just seen as this almost like pathetic,
he's watching all of Lula's Instagram stories. Is
exactly.
What you're saying. Yeah.
Right, and he's shaken because remember in 2018, Bolsonaro avoided the debates in the second round. He cannot articulate.
That's familiar.
A vision, exactly. It sounds. There were rumors that Trump was going to try to do the same thing, and so one imagines he is terrified of facing Lula on a stage in the second round, and so we'll see.
We'll have to have you in when that's starting to come in, so you can tell us how things are going and what things are looking like when we have more.
Yeah,
one bet
post-debate analysis for sure.
Maybe a third storyline here just to watch is that there are some now movements, some speculation that Bolsonaro might not even make the runoff. I don't tend to think that because I think, as Julia said earlier, I think he does have a floor of support that are with him throughout all this. But especially Ciro Gomes, who I mentioned, is trying to get that coveted third way spot. He seems to be betting that the runoff will be between him and Lula, sort of center against center left. Again, I find that to be unlikely, but it's something to watch.
Man, it's a big one. For all of the ways in which we're talking about how Brazil and the United States are different, there also is just so many things that the two nations share in common as these big, diverse countries with, fraught racial histories and cosmopolitan populations, and just what happens matters so much.
Totally. Yeah. Large multiracial democracies with, violent police forces, countries that see themselves as playing a leadership role not only in the hemisphere but in the world, and it's just tragic, even aside from the pandemic, how far Brazil has fallen in diplomatic terms in its standing from the kind of assertive, positive role that it played a decade and a half ago to this real pariah status that Brazil is just not used to playing. Right, Brazil is usually looked upon favorably in international forums and all of that. And I think it's the damage that this administration has done will take a long time to repair, I think. Because it's one thing for the United States to burn bridges and, for Trump to alienate, European allies and all of that. But it's the United States, right? Brazil doesn't have that luxury, I think, of sort of expending.
We can just bully everyone into being friends with us again.
Pretty much, right? And Brazil relies on kind of cultural diplomacy and strategic investments to dig itself out of this hole. Again, I think if anybody can do that, it would be someone like Lula, who seems eager to lead that charge. But
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're coming up on time here. I did want to quickly, before we jump off, give you a chance to briefly speak about the book you're working on, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So It's based on my dissertation that I defended in 2018 at Brown. It's been consistently delayed now because I had we had some kids, and then now the coronavirus. I need to get back to the archives in Brazil. But basically, it's a history of 20th century politics in Brazil, organized around this idea of nationalism, of nationalist, what I call the nationalist label. So what does it mean to identify as a nationalist, to call something a nationalist agenda, to speak of nationalism at different points in the 20th century? What kind of appeals work? What kind of arguments work in one moment and other times don't? Because over the course of the 20th century, nationalism is invoked to justify social democratic reforms and the expansion of democracy. And then just a few years later, to justify authoritarian right-wing dictatorship.
Totally.
And so it's this kind of history of the 20th century told through the shifting definitions of nationalism. And so,
that slippery word self-determination that kind of goes through the whole...
The national interest. Like, how does that get defined? What arguments work to mobilize people, right, around a certain agenda? So
we are going to have you back on to talk about that for sure, because there's so much
to.
Interesting things to talk about in terms of just use and misuse of the term nationalism. Even it almost has become a useless article, along with so many vocabulary words that we.
That's part of what drew me to the argument. Exactly. Because this seems like a moment to be talking about definitions of nationalism, right? Like, what is my nationalism? What is your nationalism? What is patriotism? I mean, these kind of slippery words.
And sort of the way that manifests in. Colonial nations and former colonized nations, and how different, it can have very different meanings in those.
Yeah, it's good to be proud of your country. Yeah, but not you guys.
Exactly.
Yeah,
everybody except you guys. Be proud of your country.
That's why I'm eager to get the book done, so I can really have these conversations, and then people can read it and all of that. So.
All right.
My goal
Get
is
off our show and back to work
next year.
Then,
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Andre. This was fantastic, and we'll look forward to.
Deep dive.
Yes, we'll be watching closely next year, and we'll be looking forward to having you back.
Sounds good. Good luck with the show. Thanks again for the invitation. This was a real pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Ciao.
Bye.
Yes?
I'd like to ask you, eventually, do you hope for a world where everyone can live together?
Well, we are, I know, today in a very difficult position and much criticized by the rest of the world. Much of that criticism is by no means unbased, although I still think that people are very unsympathetic in their view on South Africa. Now, you ask whether we hope for a world for a country where everybody can live peacefully together. Our policy is aimed at territorial segregation.
Yes, but,
and we hope that we can, in the first place, not have our own culture swamped. In the second place, not have the Negro living in our own communities as inferiors, owing no capital, having a very little education in their own corresponding with their own background. Wherefore, we wish to give them a position in which they will be able to uphold their own.
Well, I understand this, except that I don't understand if eventually, I know one of my wishes is that the world as a whole can live together peacefully.
Mm-hmm.
And in our own countries, if we are going to separate into different territories because of cultural differences, I don't see how we possibly can solve the problem of having one united world.
Yes,
even Marita, I'm not going to be sympathetic with you here, because at any rate, in the Union of South Africa, the Negroes haven't got any rights at all. There's racial discrimination.
That is not true.
That's true. You've got the apartheid policy. What is the aim of the apartheid policy?
The aim of apartheid policy is to give both the Europeans, with the Europeans, I mean not Europeans, but people of European extraction and the Negro, a chance to live together peacefully and both contribute towards the development of their country.
See, I consider apartheid policy as a system of social, economic, political, and rather sexual separation based on the basis of race.
Well, all right. Now, you say social, economic,
political,
political
and sexual separation based on
right. Now, I say that in South Africa, we spend more per head per year on educating and giving medical facilities and giving general facilities to our Negroes than is done in any other state in Africa. What do you say to that, Lee?
I'm sure that in South Africa, every white man gets more money per head from the local resources. So in actual fact, you get more from the local people than they get from you.
Marita, the Supreme Court in the United States recently passed a law saying that separate but equal was not valid, that if you separate, even though you have better facilities or equal facilities, if there is a separation, it's not valid. And this is just
It's not equal, you're saying?
It's not equal. And this is happened for our own country, and I'd like to ask you as well as everyone else whether they feel.
Welcome to Your Global News Radio, a segment where our show coordinator, Forrest Lovette, puts together some interesting articles that are happening around that we hope you'll investigate further to get a deeper understanding of what's happening around the globe. Look, this is going to be very crudely teleprompted because, as you know, most of our equipment is in a container on a ship crossing the ocean from America to Germany. Luckily, it will be protected by the American Navy, who control all of the world's sea lanes. Okay, let us begin. Item 1, a tale of two ministry. Ex-Italian PMs take the reins again. One previous Italian Prime Minister, Giuseppe Conte, has accepted the challenge of taking over the divided Cinque Stelle party. The party's founder, comedian Beppe Grillo, has pleaded for Conte to help rebuild the organization and reshape it into a more traditional, less anti-establishment party. In a 34-minute video, Conte laid out a seemingly progressive agenda that is dumping previously held anti-immigration and Eurosceptic stances. Meanwhile, a second ex-PM, Enrico Letta, is leading the charge for the center-left Democratic Party. Political Europe says the PD has witnessed significant decline in recent years and is looking for revitalization from the well-known Letta. These two former premiers and their parties are now vying for control in the unpredictable political landscape that is Italy. And this subject we will be diving into a lot further on our segment Smart Club, where we'll have some extremely intelligent people breaking down Cinque Stelle in this moment. It's very interesting. CDU, Germany's Green Party is surging, and Germany's majority party, the Christian Democrats, are worried. One recent poll has Die Grünen polling at the highest in their recorded history. Although the opinion poll was released by a German tabloid, Bild, it does raise alarm for Angela Merkel's party, with upcoming federal elections in September. The Greens are polling at 28%, while the CDU and their sister party, the CSU, polled at 27%. Both parties have formally nominated their candidate for chancellor, with the CDU nominating staunch Merkel supporter Armin Laschet and the Greens selecting Annalena Baerbock. Baerbock is leading the charge, which has seen a record 2,000 people sign up for Green Party membership, despite her detractors citing her lack of governing experience. Item 3, revolutionary televised. Navalny makes his court appearance. The Guardian is reporting that Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny has made his first appearance after a 24-day hunger strike. Navalny looked gaunt in a video feed to the courtroom in which he was appealing his defamation conviction. He's been in prison since he came back from Germany in January and is serving a 3.5-year sentence. Navalny said on a video feed, "I'm a creepy skeleton." He also made reference to Putin and the emperor's new clothes, saying, "I want to say, my dear judge, that your king is naked, and it's not just one boy yelling about it, millions of people are yelling about it." Navalny unsurprisingly lost the appeal, and this comes after the closure of his network of regional headquarters in Russia and his 2 political aides being named suspects in a separate criminal case. And I would also add that I would encourage all of our viewers to really look up Navalny, who is a complicated figure and has, in his background, said some very unpleasant and unfortunate things about minorities in the Russian country. And it's just one of those things when we don't like people, we got to be careful about the people we get in bed with who don't like those people, because you start to smack of Latin America after a while, right? Item 4, India in crisis. The nation reels from a virus spike. This week, the country's official death toll exceeded 200,000. Images coming from the country paint a dire picture as hospitals are overflowing with the infected, and while chimneys in some crematoriums have cracked due to overuse. Many families have been forced to burn their deceased with wooden funeral pyres in parking lots and other open spaces. Indian virologist Vinita Bal spoke with Deutsche Welle
about the situation and blamed the Indian leadership for their complacency in the crisis. Many are looking for causes such as political rallies and religious gatherings as super spreader events. Others blame Western countries like the US for vaccine hoarding. Right-wing President Narendra Modi comes under scrutiny and draws deserved comparisons to other right-wing leaders and their botched responses, such as Bolsonaro in Brazil and Donald Trump in the United States. Speaking of O Diabo, Bolsonaro under fire. The Brazilian parliament has created an inquiry committee to investigate President Bolsonaro's response to the coronavirus pandemic. The Brazilian leader is accused of refusing and delaying the acquisition of vaccines and embezzling federal funds that should have been used to fight the pandemic. Bolsonaro has continued to downplay the significance of the virus even as the country becomes a global hotspot. R&D says if Bolsonaro is found guilty by the committee's 11 neutral members, the results can be used as a starting point for the impeachment process. Item 6, one bad apple. EU hits with antitrust charges. Anonymous officials have confirmed by the Financial Times to Deutsche Welle that the EU will be ruling against Apple in the recent antitrust case. The initial complaint was brought forward by music streaming service Spotify over Apple's commission fees. The EU Competition Commission is focused on Apple's dominant share of the app marketplace and how they exerted their power, taking 30% to distribute apps. But this case is just one of 4 currently underway between the EU and Apple. Another case is checking on the questionable tax arrangements of the mega corporation. I assure you there'll be plenty to find. But the real way to get it done will be actually to regulate these companies, regulate tech companies. It's very, very popular all across Europe. In fact, when I was working in the Netherlands, one of the things we saw pop in polls over and over again was when you talked about maybe we should tax Facebook a little more. People get it. People want it. Item 7, fourth estate tax. Zimbabwean journalist clashes with government. African News is reporting the High Court of Zimbabwe has dropped charges against investigative journalist Hopewell Chinono. Chinono was detained in January and charged with tweeting falsehoods, as many of us have, but the court determined the charges have no legal basis. However, the award-winning filmmaker has been arrested 2 other times for charges of inciting public violence and obstructing justice. He wrote on his Twitter, "Although one case used to politically persecute me has been quashed by the High Court, the state refuses to give me my camera and my journalism equipment. The idea is to cripple my work. There are 2 more outstanding cases built on the trumped-up charges as part of harassing me." Chinono is currently freed on bail, and his Twitter is being closely monitored by the Zimbabwean government. Item 8, Memo Myanmar. Pro-democracy movement threatened. The Socialist Worker reports a leaked memo has surfaced in Myanmar, which reveals sections of the military regime are prepared to crush the democracy movement. As of April, there have already been over 800 killings in the protests and thousands more detained. Although further violence was discussed and condemned at the ASEAN Conference of Southeast Asian countries, they did not explicitly condemn Myanmar's controlling military regime. But supporters of the movement are hopeful that the added attention for such conferences might garner some sort of humanitarian intervention. Item 9, Great Scott. Scottish independence protests. This past Saturday, rallies converged in Glasgow, Dundee, and Edinburgh to support the Scottish independence movement. The Socialist Worker says that Scottish National Party is the favourite to win the May 6th elections over the Labour Party and the Tories. Boris Johnson has vowed another referendum for independence will not take place as long as he is Prime Minister. Furthermore, the SNP's manifesto states the earliest vote could happen in 2023. Organizers hope their mounting pressure will force the SNP to hold a second referendum, dubbed Indie Ref 2. I'm not sure it's as catchy as Brexit, but it's certainly a nobler cause. Item 10, Act or Else. U.S. Democrats under pressure to back the PRO Act. Union leaders in the U.S. have warned Democratic senators that they will lose support in next year's elections if they do not back the Protecting the Right to Organize Act or PRO Act. Politico reports the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades was one of the labor groups who specifically called out on the fence Senate Democrat Mark Kelly and Kirsten Sinema and Mark Warner of Virginia. Sinema has already proven a total lack of solidarity with workers as she emphatically voted against the $15 minimum wage. Democrats will have a steep hill to climb if they lose support of labor unions heading into 2022. And one thing I will just add on to this, and this is our final thing, is I do think with Mark Kelly, he does have a real relationship with the former Vice President, current President Biden. And I do think that you will see Biden able to get Mark Kelly to vote for the things that he wants, but Biden has to want them. I think you'll specifically see that, especially with guns, because Gabby Gifford's group are very close to the vice presidents. Actually, if you've seen that footage that I shot with Biden hugging the boy. That was actually at a Giffords event. So what'd you think, Forrest? That was our first Global News Roundup. I thought it went well.
Yeah, I think so. I really like the tone, and it's just kind of like...
Gotta keep it moving.
Yeah.
I do think we had a diversity of political ideas. I liked what I saw. Maybe people are also interested in Northern Ireland. There's some riots. Riots are very sexy.
Riots, sexy.
What I didn't see is sort of people's specialty interests. I think we should have had more maybe news items on werewolves and the occult or yoga, or the combination of those things together.
Werewolf yoga.
We got to meet the people where they're at, and I think where they're at is probably werewolf yoga.
Werewolf yoga.
Let's do it. I appreciate you. Thank you. See you next time. Okay.
Rising sea salt spray. Yeah. I should have probably gotten a haircut, is what I was thinking about. But
I'm so jealous.
that looks a little worse now. That's good. That's good.
Actually, I'm jealous. You look so jealous.
Oh, that's good. Oh my God, now I can't move. Now I can't move for the next hour.
So jealous. My hair is so hot.
Gerbaudo. That's what we're currently doing, Jacopo. Paolo Gerbaudo.
Gerbaudo.
Gerbaudo, giusto? Gerbaudo.
Gerbaudo.
Gerbaudo. Okay.
Sì.
Hi, we're going to do our deepest dive, not deeper than the deep dive, in a segment we're calling Smart Club. And today it's going to be about Cinque Stelle, so let's dive in. On October 4th, 2009, Italian comedian Beppe Grillo and Gian Roberto Castelletti, an emergent web strategist, founded the Five-Star Movement, or Cinque Stelle, perhaps the most interesting development in the politics of Europe this century. The anti-establishment populist group has resisted definition or a proper left-right classification, but has turned out to be a rebel force to contend with in Italy, winning municipal, regional, and even national elections, before, of course, a fall. A recent plummet in polls, and a subsequent political crisis engineered by centrist agitator Matteo Renzi against the Conte-led government. With us on our first Smart Club panel to discuss the rise and fall of the Cinque Stelle are Paolo Gerbaudo, sociologist and senior lecturer in digital culture and society at King's College London University, and author of an upcoming book, The Great Recoil, Politics After Populism and Pandemic. I see what you did with the P's there. And I think that's coming out in July. And I think you dropped the cover on Twitter. I saw that. Nadia Urbinati, Italian political theorist and professor of political theory at Columbia University in New York, and author of Me the People, How Populism Transforms Democracy, carefully avoiding the alliteration. And we respect that as well. And then Rachel Donadio, Paris-based journalist, contributing writer at The Atlantic, and the former Rome bureau chief of the New York Times. And I will say, even before we start this, I have personally worked in my political life in Italy with candidates associated with Cinque Stelle and using their party apparatus. So I just feel like I should be transparent about that up front. But welcome, y'all. Let's talk, about Cinque Stelle. Like most things, it's a moment in history and it's a movement founded by people. But can we start with the moment? Italy is famously a country with a lack of a political center, or maybe that was true until a man named Berlusconi whacked the whole thing to the right. Nadia, can I ask you just to set the stage for us? The First Republic is falling.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting...
What is the opening?
My opening on the Five Stars movement has to do with the opening on the Italian system, political system and party system. This is the story of a party who doesn't want to be a party and cannot avoid being a party. So the Italian democratic system has been, since the beginning, we can go back at the beginning of the 20th century, we start with, after World War II, a kind of an indigestible relationship with political parties, particularly because they present themselves after the liberation as the liberators, thus covering one part of the country, the north, and the south was completely outside of this process of parties and liberation together, because it was liberated by the Americans and not by the partisans and the party. So there was a kind of dualism in the new Republican Italy, which remained persistently, although we didn't see it until the end of the Cold War, when finally all the ideologies could be lifted, and we saw the reality. And the reality was a disaggregation of parties' life and the constructions of movements after movements, extra parliamentary movement first, and then movements that claim to be the substitution for parties in the name of good democracy, true democracy. So the Five Stars movement wanted to re-achieve democracy out of the party's appropriation of it, and in doing so, they had to move. And now they are facing the crisis. The first move declared themselves to be not simply a movement, but an anti-party movement. And as an anti-party movement to enter the political system based on parties. Second important move they made is to declare not to have a physical headquarters system and the physical organizational system, to be simply digital and online. Thus, total movement on the square, because it was spontaneous aggregations, and movements outside of the square by and through this new kind of square through the web. So these two important transformations that change a lot in our parliamentary system, and the way of thinking of politics now is facing another important change. And here I stop. This movement is going to be very soon a new party. And this is the story that Paolo Gerbaudo already started telling us in the newspaper Domani a few days ago. And so we are in front of ourselves with a movement born to be an anti-party and forced to be a party.
And then, Paolo, can you tell us a bit more about Beppe Grillo? Maybe sort of, for the American audience, a Jon Stewartish figure, but certainly with a twist, because there is a man at the center of this as well, and certainly it's come back this week.
Completely. Beppe Grillo is really, in a way, the synthesis of this party's potential and of its flaws. He is a figure that became very famous because of his satire, because of his very histrionic character, and because of the way in which his comedy was increasingly about politics and criticism of corporations. In a way, was running in parallel to the anti-globalization movement at some point. Criticism of technology at some point, though then he becomes a technophile. He goes from smashing computers on the stage to becoming a techno-utopian. And that's the moment when he meets Casaleggio, this web guru that really becomes instrumental in his success. And in a way, initially, really the public, the groups of people he gathers around him are the people that, the spectators of his shows, right? He's a person who tours Italy all the time with these shows, with these raging attacks against the political class, against corporations, and so on and so forth. But then progressively it broadens this public to other people. So it's not anymore the middle class that goes to these shows, right? And the people like them, but also increasingly people who are really in trouble. I mean, people who are from basically what once upon a time we would have called the working class, right? Or what today people would call the precariat. People who are unemployed, people who are earning very little, people who are very insecure, people who are very precarious. That's a bit, in a way, the kind of miracle, right, that he manages to pull off. I mean, recently he has been in the news for something really sad, and which is basically because he furiously defended his son, who is accused of involvement in gang rape, right? So which is really troubling, and it tells you of how flawed also the movement was, starting from his leader. But I think that all in all, it's a movement that needs to be understood in a complex way, because it is the largest party in Italy, right? I mean, it had 30% in the polls last time around, and to a great extent, it was precisely because it managed to represent people who were not represented by anyone, starting with workers and the poor.
Initially, though, and Rachel, especially as an American who was so steeped in working in Italy, throughout some of this time, initially it's a call to action. Quite literally, a fuck you movement, fuck you days come. What is your impression of the people who initially were coming to those? Is it the precarious workers who Paolo's talking about? I mean, it's obviously a wide swath of society if it's going to start adding up to 30% a few short years later.
Exactly. In the early days, the party was very much a web platform. And I think what we need to understand, what sets this movement apart from other political movements in Italy, is that it had the most developed web infrastructure of any party or movement in Italy. And so people would go to Beppe Grillo's blog, and it would be a place to talk about all kinds of issues, whether local, not in my backyard issues or larger issues, foreign policy issues, a kind of anger and discontent that Grillo was able to capture. Now, the party evolves and develops to the point that it does quite well in the elections in 2013, February 2013. Generally, when a party does well in Italy, it's also because the other parties are doing badly. And so it absorbed a lot of the momentum of some of the, let's say, centrist parties on the right and the left, the PD and Forza Italia at the time, that just were not seen as having a lot of momentum. Forza Italia in 2013 was already on the decline because Berlusconi in 2011 had stepped down, a victim of his bad management of the country's economy during the Euro crisis. The PD, the center-left, main Democratic Party, has constantly had multiple identity crises. First, it couldn't figure out where it stood, whether it was the heirs of the Christian Democrats or of the communists. Now it has similar kind of Italian version of the AOC versus Hillary Clinton kind of wings, where it can't decide if it's, like social democrats or progressives. And so because of the confusion in some other parties, the Five Star Movement took that momentum. It did extremely well in the 2018 elections in Italy. And I was in Piazza del Popolo for the Atlantic at the last rally of the Five Star Movement in 2018. And I talked to people, and some were former communists, some were former voters of far-right parties, and so it really absorbed a lot of discontent. But what made it do so well in that election was promising universal basic income and having kind of an ambiguous line about, we want more sovereignty, we don't really like Europe, but we don't really want to leave Europe, but we kind of are upset about it. I mean, it captured a lot of different contradictions, and that is really what caused it to get more than 30% of the vote in 2018. Promising universal basic income, which went over very well in the South, and capturing a lot of free-floating discontent that did not find a clear expression in some of the more mainstream parties. I'll conclude by saying one other thing, which is that while Grillo has remained kind of the soul and the godfather of the party, it is always unclear who is leading this party. And in fact, in technical terms, in 2017, before the 2018 elections, the Five Star Movement was refounded, and the kind of owners of its database of voters, and this will turn out to be important, are Davide Casaleggio, the son of Gian Roberto, the web guru who founded the platform that became the movement, and Luigi Di Maio. So they kind of own the party in certain ways. And so Grillo remains spiritually connected, but he could actually never be in parliament because he had a conviction for involuntary manslaughter in a car accident, and which means he could never actually be an elected official. So Grillo remains a kind of godfather figure. Then there's Di Maio and Davide Casaleggio who kind of own the party, but then there are other currents in the party, and it's founded in this kind of direct democracy way so that we're never really sure who's leading it. And this is also one of the reasons why it's in such a crisis today. But to conclude, I mean, it kind of absorbed a lot of free-floating political discontent that needed a direction.
Which everyone wants to do, but so few actually pull off. So Nadia, it occurs to me to wonder how ideologically flexible, to use sort of a slightly dangerous term, do you find the Cinque Stelle, and how does that play out? Let's actually talk about it.
Yeah, that is the characteristic of Five Stars movement since the beginning. Capable of including different issues or different claims without specifying basic principles of orientation, so that it could be in favor of universal income, but also against the immigrants. and thus to be in between the right and the left, actually above or below or outside or behind them, and thus capable of attracting all. Moreover, this flexibility showed itself in the selections of the candidates. I remember the first important moments in which they entered the campaign, the electoral campaign for administrative elections, and they elected the mayor of one of the most important industrial cities in the north, Parma. And they used to select their candidates by asking for CVs. They were looking for objective, meritocratic sign of competences without attachment to any ideologies. Actually, they were this kind of objectocracy, I call them, looking for the objectivity without ideologies and without partisanship, and meritocracy and technocratic smartness. All this together gave them different inputs inside. People who were more neoliberal, people who were more protectionist, people who were more socially oriented, and others more against social interference of the state. So different orientations, but that became a problem once they had to rule. So the first things we see that once they are in government, both in Parma, immediately the clash started in Parma when the new mayor, very competent, but at the beginning not at all a politician, so incapable of using his power against the Five Stars and the other parties, he decided to step out and to abandon the party and to create his own list. And this was the beginning of a process of articulations of many movements inside of these movements, so that at the end, as soon as they start entering the government, particularly recently in 2018, they showed that they could stay with the right and with the left, with the League and with the party, democratic parties, and in doing so, they became kind of chameleontic to the point that they lost some people instead of achieving strength. No, now, apparently, although 32% in terms of numbers in the seats in parliaments, they are around 18% in the audience. So they slash practically the half. This means that they have to position themselves. They cannot simply float in the middle of everything, being bipartisan when is necessary or very strongly oppositional when necessary. And this is what Giuseppe Conte is trying to do, to position these to become party movements into a between center-left. So that is going to compete with the PD in this case, clearly, because they are focusing on the same electorate. So they are looking for alliance, but it's an alliance that will cover what? What kind of electorship is going to attract? I agree with Rachel in this case. They attract in the South people who are jobless, in looking for support and assistance. In the North, they don't have support, and in the North, they will use perhaps the PD. So it's a kind of alliance that is functional somehow, capable of covering parts of of countries that neither of the two parties capable of doing. So perhaps it's a functional, would be a functional alliance for peace. Fine.
A confederation more than an alliance, or an alliance of two people trying to park a car in the same spot.
Rachel, sorry, you want to jump in? Then I have a question for Paolo.
I just want to jump in. I mean, you mentioned the term ideologically flexible. I think we need to be careful with the term ideology, because I also think we could introduce the term opportunism. I mean, they came into power with this platform that they would only serve a certain number of terms, that they would give a certain amount of their salaries as elected officials to Casaleggio's system that runs the web platform. Many of them haven't done that, and so now there's a lawsuit about money, and they came into power saying we want to be against the system, and now they're in parliament and don't want to leave parliament because they kind of like it there. So there is a certain amount of opportunism, and that also comes through. Luigi Di Maio came in to power skeptical of NATO, and now that Draghi is running the government has become much more Atlanticist, and Luigi Di Maio is foreign minister. So there's always been a certain amount of opportunism in Italian politics, not just Italian politics, but so it's really just a question of power and who can can harness that. And then it's not like we go to this party because this is what it believes in, but the party, which was founded on a kind of marketing skill, understands like what do people maybe want, and therefore will go meet them there. There's always been an interesting tension between we're setting the agenda ideologically and people will follow us, and we're listening to what's out there and we're setting our policies based on what people want. And I think the Five Star Movement does that more than other parties, in part because it was founded basically as the political arm of a web marketing consulting firm. And so it has quite a lot of skills in doing that. Giuseppe Conte, who was prime minister in 2 governments with the Five Star Movement, he is not actually a member of the Five Star Movement. So he might be able to be the leader of a centrist bloc, but he's not technically in the party. And according to the bylaws of the party, in order for him to request membership, there would be like a 6-month delay before he would be allowed to vote in the own party elections for party leaders, because the way the Five Star Movement works is there's this web platform, Rousseau, and all the members vote to elect the new leader. And so he might not even be able to do that technically. This is a technicality which other parties should be able to overcome, but it does speak to some of the many internal contradictions of this movement.
And to the quick rise, right? There's maybe not all the I's and T's have been dotted in their charter. But Paolo, to be, really, to break down a little farther, I think especially what people in America find surprising, they have governed both with Lega, with the right, and with the center left, the PD currently. What has that looked like, and what have they accomplished through that? Because obviously that is a huge, obstacle, but obviously it must be an opportunity for something.
Yes, I think that they have an ideology. So sometimes, this flexibility is not down to the fact that they are deprived of ideology. Their ideology is this anti-political elite stance, right? And they voice it not because they hate politics as such, but because many people have grown wary of the political class, because the political class is seen as favoring economic elites, is seen as favoring this discourse that we cannot have the good things, right? Austerity, responsibility, so-called. And this is a discourse that can align both with the left and with the right, which explains why they've been in government with Lega and in government with the Partito Democratico. The first coalition in 2018 came after 1 month and a half of negotiations with Lega, a populist right party. So it was described as the populist coalition because it was the two souls of populism, as it were, that we have been seeing around the world. Right-wing populism and perhaps kind of mild left-wing populism in the case of Five Star reunited, right? But in a context where right-wing populism at the upper end ultimately, because Salvini from the Ministry of Interior started using that as a sort of warship through which to bombard both the left and his own allies, right? Attacking them all the time, taking away from them some motives, including the anti-case motive, and polarizing people more around issues having to do with immigration. Right? So actually, the movement of votes away from the Five Star and towards the right started with the government during the alliance between the Five Star movement and Lega, right? To the point that Salvini felt so emboldened, he thought he could force snap elections. But that was a moment of hubris, the typical moment when politicians think they are stronger than they are, and it completely recoiled upon him spectacularly. And it was also the moment when Conte actually became a politician and not a puppet anymore, in a way. It was quite an extraordinary moment in politics. It really shows, in a way, how politics is really not just a projection of social forces, but a theater of its own where things happen. Because there was this famous debate in the Senate with Salvini next to him and Conte basically treating him a bit as a kind of father treats a stupid son, like, patting him on the back, Matteo, you're a bit crazy and stuff. And it was a complete humiliation for Salvini. And it was a moment where Conte demonstrated he actually had leadership skills. And that people liked him because he was quite a decent person. Someone who was not like the other people, right? So then this coalition with Partito Democratico began, which looked quite interesting because it looked a bit as a sort of recapitulation of social democracy adapted to the conditions of the 21st century. They started talking about minimum wage, which in Italy we don't have. We are the only country in the EU, except for Austria and Sweden, that doesn't have a minimum wage, and salaries in Italy are at the lowest of most OECD countries, I mean, most Western European countries, right? They started really kind of mobilizing interesting, moderate social democratic policies. So they look really, really hopeful. But then we know what happened, right? With these blitz by Renzi, clearly allied with other figures, against Conte, and this new center-left alliance, which, despite being moderate, right, and Conte is often described as a Christian Democrat of the left, because indeed he's a Christian person with some social values coming from the social teachings of the church, but no more than that. But already that was unacceptable for the Italian establishment, that something like that could exist, right? That minimum, very small gains could be made for the popular classes. It was already too much, right? That's why they toppled him.
It's, you know, it's interesting when you look at how they sort of occupying the same space, and how Conte sort of, he's talking about him becoming a politician. He really did seem to have this COVID bump, you know, that it sort of spoke towards technocratic competence, these things that are going in. Nadia, what do you think, who gets to inherit the 15% is, I guess, what I'm asking. You know, is it this new space in the center that speaks towards a squishy gray area between the Contes and the Draghis of the world, or does this space dissolve back into its natural tendencies on the left and the right, where they belong? Some might say.
This is precisely the issue today, in my view, because the Conte's project to become the leader of the Five Stars movements and of potentially the coalition with the Democratic Party, because they are constructing the coalition in view of the new elections. The idea is to cover the entire 32 plus and to reach the 40%. So to reconfirm the thickness of both parties and expand a little bit at the expense of the left, of the center. I don't know whether this can be achieved because, but I can think that it is a reasonable project. Why is a reasonable project? You see it from the opposite, because there are so many people against this project, many in the media, many inside of the central right, many within the television talk shows and so on and so forth. So there is a kind of attention to what people don't want. Who are the people who don't want? Those who didn't like Conte, those who are establishment based, and they are somehow, they consider this plebeian reconfiguration of the coalition politics in Italy. They don't like. They don't like the Five Stars movement. The Five Stars movement for the establishment is plebs, and they dislike radically. So what they want in moment is what they want to is to avoid, to prevent this coalition, and thus there is a bombing every day, attacking on this possibility by destroying the legitimacy of the Five Stars. Now, of course, Grillo gives them a great opportunity to score because he's in a very bad moment. Now, this means that in the future, in my view, it will be very interesting to see constructions of this alliance between the PD and the Five Stars movement. And in my view, it is a well-grounded alliance. Many people want it, although not the people who define and decide over the opinion. So there is a split in this country between opinion makers and people outside. Very truly, I mean, you can taste it. You can feel it when you are here.
Rachel, you look like you want to jump in on that.
I mean, I think it's a really interesting point. Remember that after the 2018 elections, when Renzi was still leading the PD,
See, there's the magic name. Yeah, like, you know. Yeah.
Yes. Right, his party did historically badly, but he still wouldn't step down as party leader. He refused to make an alliance between the Five Star Movement and the PD, saying, you know, the Five Star Movement are these we can't trust these weirdo populists, we're not going to do the alliance. So maybe, things have maybe changed now with Conte. But I also think when we talk about the establishment in Italy, I mean, like, everyone is the establishment. At this point, the Five-Star Movement is the establishment. And
yeah, but not yet. Not yet.
All right. Well, they're fans of the Five-Star Movement in some elements of the media in Italy, and I think the connection between the mainstream media and the political parties is one that's very important in Italy, more maybe than in other countries, where even though, like, print newspapers, which have plummeting newsstand sales, like, people are not reading these, but they're still important, also the televisions, and so who is promoting what agenda in the mainstream media, television, newspapers, is important. But as we see, both the Lega and the Five-Star Movement have done extremely well communicating through social media and the internet. And if I have one regret in my years as Rome bureau chief of the New York Times between 2008 and 2013, it's that I don't feel like I took the web seriously enough, because I was kind of talking to the establishment, like, well, that's what the establishment says, and I do think there is a kind of sentiment that the Five-Star Movement taps into, but there is also, I think that the more historic political parties have not been able to adapt in a certain way. I'm never entirely clear where the pure politics and personalities end and where the ideological battles begin. So I don't know if the establishment that Nadia is talking about is pushing against Conte and against the Five-Star Conte alliance because of his views or the views of the party, or because they just think, like, this guy's incompetent. I mean, the whole behind the scenes of the, like, Draghi coming in, the establishment line is like, we can't trust these people with the bailout, with the recovery funds, right?
May I give you an example? May I give an example? Just one. One of the reasons why all my friends in the news, particularly the newspapers, Huffington and people in the Repubblica and La Stampa, they were upset with the government and Conte, truly upset. Why? One of the reasons, the most important, because he's PR, public relation, and he was a member, he was an actor coming from the Big Brother reality show, and they were obsessed by being offended by transforming the government into the place of the reality show people. And so they refused even to talk to him.
Berlusconi, I mean, didn't they remember the Berlusconi chapter? But
Berlusconi came from the north. He came from Milan. They come from the south. So the north is ruling in this moment the country. The north is
No, the press guy for the Five-Star Movement famously doesn't return anybody's call in the mainstream media. But I don't know if that, which is irritating, but I don't know if that's what is, like, the ultimate symbol of establishment.
It's not a good strategy. I will say that. Folks with different ideologies, I'll just throw some out there. Barack Obama, Bernie Sanders, Jeremy Corbyn. When you work on those campaigns and you meet the campaigners and you're hanging out, they're movement people. They're movement people. They have a certain vibe. It's hard to describe. That is the vibe I got from working with Cinque Stelle people, especially on the ground in Liguria for this last regional election. Was the folks, it was a PD, Five-Star Alliance, and the kind of people who were very active on those campaigns were Five-Star movement people, like people who go to meetings and they are very engaged. And so I think they're amply establishment but engaged people. Where are they going to go, Paolo? Where is their home? It's a very specific person, but it's a very important person because it's the person that the PD can't seem to hold on to. Right? Yeah. This is their last 10% they never get.
I think that you really need to understand what is going on in terms of a volcanic politics. Because all the structures of representation, of popular representation that were there in the post-war period become sclerotic, and they are falling down, right? So the trade unions and all the socialist parties and communist parties that were giving a channel for people's demands, to voice people's anger, to voice people's interest, are not there anymore. So what happens is that you have a dual society, right? I mean, the integrated people who are part of trade unions or civic associations who somehow feel represented. That's basically the middle class these days. And then you have a growing and growing section of the population that doesn't fit anywhere. Right? The working class of before has become the middle class now because they have gone through their social mobility, right? In the 60s and the 70s. And that's the PD, which is now the party of pensioners and civil servants, fundamentally. These are the figures that are the most important ones. But then you have these huge ocean of people that are not represented by anyone, and it's like a geyser that whenever it finds a hole, whenever it finds a channel, it will use it for however flowed it is, right? It doesn't matter how flowed it is. The most unlikely vessel, if there is an opening in the system, it will exploit that opening. Much as it happened with Corbyn, right? That it surprised anyone. How the hell did this happen? This was impossible. Yes, because there was a very small opening and the unrepresented used it to the full extent. Same thing with Bernie Sanders, right? During the primaries. Nobody in 2016 was expecting it would come so close to snatching away the nomination from Hillary Clinton. But again, it's because there is all this pent-up anger, and whenever it finds a space to use it, it does. Same thing with the Five-Star Movement, right? It has, in a way, unwittingly become the vessel of popular anger. I think now there are two possibilities. There is sort of bifurcation, two possible paths. There are people who want to normalize the Five-Star Movement, including Di Maio, want to turn it into yet another liberal party, into yet another centrist party, as if we didn't have enough liberal centrist parties in Italy. There's more centrist parties in Italy than there are centrist voters. And the other thing is basically to take a stance and say, we are standing for working people, we are standing for poor people that unfortunately are not represented by Partito Democratico. Let's be clearer about what kind of interest we represent, because it is impossible to represent the people. You always represent a section of the people. And let's be clear about it, and let's connect our demand for democracy, which is fundamental, with a demand to represent the rights of those who are not economically represented now in the system.
So I also would ask, do you think, and I will throw this to anyone who wants to answer it, but so much of what seems like the big boon to the right parties at the expense of the center left has been a sense of community that the parties used to foster. Being a communist meant that you had a social life. You think being a member of the Socialist Party and stuff like that. Did the Five-Star provide that sense of community that some folks were leaving and as that way came in? And how much do you think Rousseau, which is of course the name of their digital platform, has to do with that? And is that one of the legacies that's going to come out of this, is that you have to be building community, especially in a digital way?
If I say so, I was in the South when the parties, when the Five Stars movement won in the 2013, in the regional elections. Won, they entered in the competition. And I saw many people organizing meetups and associations connected to the Five Stars movement, something that you could find in the past with the Democratic Christians or even Forza Italia, Berlusconi's one, or other movements. So there is a permanent quest for community or associations based on some interest, not simply faith or beliefs, some strong interest. And yes, yet the Five-Star movement was able to replace the previous ones and to do it in a way that was functional to the disaggregating reality, which is the south of the country. They replaced practically what after World War II was the qualunquismo, the uomo qualunque movements. It was an anti-party movement collecting people, transforming the parliament as they want to by abolishing elections and substituting elections with the lottery. That was 45. So, and they had in the South still today this sense of anti-party, which is a form of community. Is we versus them. Is we versus North, those who are inside, those who are always fortunate. There is a sense of resentment plus revenge. resentment plus revenge. And this is connected to the sense of community that you were looking for.
Yeah. In this, I think the 5-star movement and the Yellow Vest movement in France actually share many things in common. And the difference, I was saying this to Nadia earlier, one of the differences between Italy and France is that in Italy, the political opposition is in parliament, like the 5-star movement. And in France, it's like on the street, the Yellow Vest movement, which is a similar kind of volatile anti-party, anti-establishment sentiment, mobilizes through the web and kind of wants to hang out together like at roundabouts and, be together. And I think that that's something very important that the 5-star movement has captured, which certainly the PD has lost. Like the PD is like a kind of intellectual thinking, disconnected from the on-the-ground reality, unfortunately, party. But I also think that, as you mentioned, Rousseau, the digital platform, that is really important. I mean, who controls the data might control the party, or who. And I think that is an important question for the legacy. And I also think it's something that other parties have looked to. The Brexiteers went to visit the 5-star movement to visit Casaleggio to find out, how does this platform work? How have you been able to kind of figure out how to, harness discontent into kind of political action? And that net roots and that digital thinking and platform is important. And I think that will last.
But very few people participate. The South is very disconnected. It's not very connected with the web. And how can they get along? Because it's, how many people participate in the voting in the referendum? They have many referendums. 40,000 of participation. So it's not so much participation through the web, which is a scam sometimes, because when they want people to vote in favor of what they want, they frame the question in a way that you vote yes by voting no. This is what they do. It's
Yeah, and certainly referendums are notoriously, one of the least democratic things that you can do. I mean, look, in that way, it's sort of super effective. I mean, Paolo, I would ask you, do you see other parties? Obviously everyone, as has been said, was super curious and what's going on with this 5 stars and kind of taking them apart. Who do you see now emerging as maybe the international inheritors of this movement besides the yellow vests on the streets of Paris?
Yeah, because I think you need to give it to them, to the 5-star, that they've been very innovative.
Internationally.
Yes, I mean, there's many other parties that have followed on the 5-star footsteps, implicitly or explicitly. I think that there is a gamut of left populist party, though again, like defining 5-star as left is very difficult. One could in terms of class background and socioeconomic issues. But obviously there's Podemos in Spain, right, which also has a participatory platform. There's La France Insoumise in France, of Jean-Luc Mélenchon. What is very interesting now in Britain, I don't know if you've heard about the Northern Independence Party, which is a party that started a bit like a joke, like an internet meme, because it advocates independence of Northumbria, which was a Saxon kingdom.
They're coming on next week, actually. Yeah.
In the 10th century. And it's super interesting, I find. I mean, now they actually are contesting an election, by election in Hartlepool. But what is really interesting is they describe themselves as democratic socialists, right? I mean, in terms of along the lines of Corbyn and Sanders. But what is interesting, what they said, is that if we go around and say we are socialist or democratic socialist, nobody listen to us. If we say we stand for the independence of a territory, so we say basically we're populist, territorial populists in a way, suddenly everyone listen, what is going on here, which I think is quite interesting. So that is another example of digital party. And I think there's Razem in Poland. Actually, there's plenty of formations now that are using a bit this new template. Which expresses also, I mean, I think a key element there is distrust of party structures and of political structures as a cartel. This idea of Richard Katz and Peter Mayer. That politics and society has become like a cartel, right? Like economic cartels controlling prices, controlling supply. This is what Nadia was saying about the media, right? The media have become cartels. They've always been, but they become more so recently, right? They are controlling supply of information. That is why suddenly everybody's surprised when this party scores those results in the election. Guess what? Because the people who were supposed to inform us are instead there to prevent people being informed and people actually knowing what is going on. The same thing applies to parties. Parties these days are there to a great extent not to represent people, but to control people. They are representing the state among the people rather than representing people in the state. So this is a general pathology of society, this cartelization of everything. Parties, cultural system, media, social organization, and so on and so forth, which inevitably leads to these mercurial and kind of magmatic formations to emerge and use any tool they have. Really, anything that works can be used as a vessel for this popular mobilization.
But the Five-Star Movement and the Lega it had television, which was important, but the Five-Star Movement did well without having, mainstream media support to a certain extent. You could argue, we could get into really technical debates about who owns the media in Italy, but I think that when you use the term cartel, you could also use the term like interest groups and things like that. Cartel.
Interest group.
And as a member of the media, I feel like it's not always like thuggish and antagonistic. And the fact that these parties have done well, they've done well in spite of some of the mainstream media. So, I just want to call you on that word.
I would like to add
and Rachel, do you think, sorry, Nadia, go ahead. No, Nadia, go ahead, please.
No, this is important what she said, because we are no longer in the Habermasian public sphere in which there is a plurality of quasi-anarchical society developing associations and medias freely. Here we have medias that are owned by corporations they have many interests vested inside of the parliament and the government. In particular in Italy, we have three big owners owning everything, all the televisions and the newspapers and the platforms also, Huffington. And they defined actually the goal of politics. They give a goal to politics and they present themselves, and many people use this, people that I know, friends of mine and political theorists, they say, look, this is a power that doesn't have any form of accountability, because in the name of free speech or free associations, they really operate in the thick way, in the thick world of politics, imposing agendas. This is what we have now. So it needs to be analyzed better, this domain of media and freedom of media, not freedom, media and organizations. I don't know whether we call cartel or interest-based media, but it's a problem for me. In Italy, at least, I feel it.
Would the knowing what they know now, would the cartel or interest group, depending on how thuggish they want to be, actively prevent the rise of the next Five-Star? Right?
Yeah.
Is this something you think they didn't see coming and are regretful, or like we could have stopped that if we'd actually given it the attention it deserved in the very beginning?
They stopped the government, and they did so in a way that was fantastic, because we have, for the first time after 45, the first time a government collapsed without even the parliament voting against it. Conte didn't even go in the parliament to ask for confidence or does not confidence. He simply resigned to the president, and the president. So it was a very strange system of transition to. And the bombing, the attack against the government was since the last year every day. We, with some friends, also Paolo was at a certain point involved. We had last June, May actually, a document, a letter, in order to prevent this everyday attack against the government. This was May 2020. We received in 24 hours 25,000 signatures. It was a splash. It means that there is a separation between what the media say and what the people would like to have. Unfortunately, I don't like to play the game of populism, but this country is incredibly divided and polarized.
I mean, Paolo, what would you say about that? Does this represent a kind of victory of the elites that's going to fuel the next,
I mean, it's amazing
wave
because
of anti?
yeah, it's amazing because Nadia is very critical of populism, and rightly so. But it tells you that the situation is now beyond a point where really also you need to give it right to certain populist forces for what they stand there to represent. And I think it's really a matter of what kind of solution there will be to this deadlock, right, between establishment and forces that stand there to represent popular interests. In Italy, we have a system that is very opaque, is very Byzantine in the way in which the president of the republic is supposed to be only a symbolic figure. By some, actually has a lot of power. That is why also the Partito Democratico really wants to keep the Presidente della Repubblica. And often this institutionalism, this idea of institutional responsibility, especially born by Partito Democratico, right? We are the people standing for the Italian Republic, for the institutions, guaranteeing the continuation of the nation, the pillar party, engenders automatically, on the other hand, this kind of populist dynamic. Right? Because people say, so is responsibility paying people so little? Is responsibility doing whatever you're told by Brussels technocrats, sometimes even more just because they say so? And therefore, it really creates this divide, this yawning gap between many people, especially in the South, as Nadia was saying, and the people who are standing there to represent them. I think that now a lot will depend on what Conte does. If Conte manages to refound the movement, right? In May, the Festa movement will have a new assembly. It also needs, in a way, to get rid of the figure of Grillo, which is now a huge liability for the movement. Conte is widely appreciated by Italians because he looks like a decent person. And being minimally decent as a human being is a plus in Italian politics these days. It is a plus. He has demonstrated he's a person who cares. He's a moderate, but he cares. That's already enough for people to have trust in him. But it is going to be a very difficult game because of all these things, because of all this resistance. And also because perhaps Conte is too much of a technocrat to be populist enough, right, to mobilize people, right? An element of the Festa movement was...
Maybe he wasn't reframed, he wasn't reborn as a politician quite politician-y enough in his rebirth.
Yeah, in the sense that...
Rachel, I also, especially... No, go ahead, Paolo.
No, I think, sorry to interrupt. I mean, it's just that the center left has this problem with channeling people anger, as if anger was wrong, right? But sometimes people are angry for good reasons, and you need to channel it in a right way, in a good way. But you need to understand why people are angry.
Exactly.
So in an election like in America, where you saw Joe Biden win, but the Democrats lose seats in the House of Representatives because the anti-establishment backlash vote is still very much present in America, do you see lessons in Five Stars rise and perhaps fall for an alliance that happens in an America where people on seemingly different ends of the spectrums are disaffected for the same reasons?
I always find it hard to make direct analogies between Italy and America, in part because Italy has so many different small parties and there's so much pure politics and there's so much kind of...
In a way, but there's still two teams. That's what I always say. You know, they rearranged the deck chairs, but there's still two teams.
Well, I mean, then I think I think that the divisions within the center-left in Italy are similar to the divisions within the center-left in the United States, in that you have kind of the progressives and the more mainstream. So you have the kind of Renzeites who are more like Hillary Clintonites, and then you have the AOCs who are maybe a little bit like Five Star, but also a little bit like, I don't know, they're younger and more
Ellie Schlein, kind of even more, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I also think Italy doesn't really have like a green movement in the way so much in the way that Germany does, for instance. And so, I mean, I think that generationally, I'm curious how young people will vote. I mean, in France, we found that a lot of young people are actually voting for the far right. They're actually supporting the far right. In Italy, maybe I think, you asked about lessons from the U.S. election. I mean, there isn't like the kind of centrist establishment figure, like Biden-like figure. There's Draghi, who's running the country, but he's a technocrat. And I actually think that the most brilliant politician is the most despised and despicable in certain ways, and that's Renzi. The person who actually captures a certain kind of centrist bloc would be Draghi, but I don't really see him going to play pure politics. I mean, I think the centrist voters who might go to Conte would definitely go to Draghi, but Draghi doesn't, maybe, I don't know, I don't call the guy, but I don't get the sense that he wants to get in the mess of Italian politics. So I don't,
he wants to float on top for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. It's hard to answer your. It's hard to answer your question. Except I'll say some of the similar impulses that are animating political debate in the United States, in Italy, in other countries in Europe: generational divides, precariousness, the ability to get a job, the ability to get a mortgage, the ability to raise a family, the ability financially to survive. Those are real things, certainly in Italy, and no party has really done a great job capitalizing on that. I think Paolo makes a really important point about the center-left being unable to capture anger. I mean, the Five-Star Movement, in the cities they've governed, they've done really badly. The cities have not been governed terribly well, right? So, I mean, again, it's like you can capture the anger, but who's going to govern and actually make people's lives better? And I don't think anyone has a good answer to that in Italy at the moment.
Well, I would like to integrate what you were just say with the 3 points. First, the institutional system in Italy is not presidential. So even if you have a good leader, he needs to have a parliamentary alliance, and this makes a leader never alone. But in the United States, the White House is there, and it is for one person, not for a coalition, for one person. And that, the great Biden, who started moderate, but sincerely moderate, because Renzi is not sincerely moderate. Renzi is a populist moderate. He does everything for himself. He has a very, King Mida kind of disposition toward power, money, and presence. Doesn't have any kind of ideas. At least the moderate Biden had strong ideas. And the moderate understood that in order to take away support from Trump, a future Trumpist also, he had to be radical. He had to take a radical change. This is what we don't have in Italy. In Italy, people are scared of being radical in their choice because they expose themselves. And in this climate of alliance and parliamentary, nobody wants to be disclaimed by others. So you need cooperation, collaboration, compromise, and thus you don't want to be radical. As the great Kelsen used to say, if you want to destroy radicalism, you create a parliamentary system. This is what we do today. I mean, this is clear. What is important then, the other element of that, this is relevant in my view, is Europe. Because to be in the European Union, beginning with the 90s, it means that this technocratic way of solving problem solving to technocracy, this infiltrated in all member states. Many member states now assume the mental habit of solving problem through technicalities without looking for party oppositions or ideological or right and left or whatever. So there is the sense, as Rosanne Ballon said, the only way that in Europe we feel that we can destroy or defeat populism is by deflating political competition or deflating the oppositional moments and expanding the non-political decision-making sectors. This is what we do. So in some sense, there are two ways to exit populism, perhaps. The American way, a strong alternation kind of relationship of power, one against the other one, but always politics. In Europe is more a way out of conglomeration of many interests under a kind of moderate technocrat or leader, kind of, not more bipartisan than partisan. Seems to be.
Paolo, I'll give you the last word because we're coming up on it. But do you think the answer is, they say famously, trust is lost in buckets and gained in drops, and obviously that's sort of a problem with the people who we're trying to get. I mean, is the answer social democracy, except nobody trusts anyone to deliver it to them properly? Or is it not that simple?
I think social democracy is coming back big time, and partly what Biden is doing, lurching to the left, like veering to the left, is really positive. I mean, I criticized Biden a lot during the primaries, but I think one need to give to him that he's doing positive things, and these are things that are very hopeful because nobody really wants to bet on collapse and after collapse, whatever the socialist paradise. I think we really need things that are practical, that are pragmatic, that solve people's problems. But you need to recognize now that if someone today stands in a situation like Italy for policies only, right, it doesn't capture something there in the public imagination. And this thing in the public imagination is the problem of democracy. We cannot have the nice things because there are people there who are preventing us from having the nice things. It's not just a chance, right? It's not just a random thing. So the crucial problem and the slogan of the popular forces should be democracy. Because if all this is happening, it's because we don't have democracy. They call it democracy, but it is not, right? As the indignados say. Which doesn't mean that we need direct democracy, but we need ultimately a real representative democracy, at the very least. Because now this democracy is not representing many people's interest. It is representing a lot of people's interest. The center is representing the certain interest in double, triple, fourfold fashion. But there are many people who are outside of representation. And if those people are kept outside, then monsters are born from that exclusion.
I love that as a way to end. Thank you so much, Paolo,
Thank
Rachel,
you.
and Nadia for being here with us. Hopefully you'll come back when we talk about other things that are adjacent to this.
Thank you.
And next week, we're going to look at the Latin American pink wave that appears to not be manifesting as we thought it might be. So see you then.
Amazing.
See you.
See you. Bye-bye.
Country, and I'd like to ask you as well as everyone else whether they feel this is true, whether separation can be equal in any sense of the word.
Well, I'd like to answer that question. Conditions in America are different. For example, in Tanganyika, we cannot have integrated education because the conditions are so different, especially the social conditions. As I said in the beginning, the standards of living are so different, and the annual income of the Africans compared to the white people is so different that we can't possibly have integrated education.
People aren't born more ignorant than one another, I mean, because of their color or their race. So if you start with their education and they are educated equally and in integrated places, then the part of the so-called vicious circle will be ended because they will be able to have equal opportunities
that's
afterwards.
true, but how can I live with a person who still lives in a grass hut and who still hunts lions with his spear and who still uses his wife as a beast to work in his field?
But that's why education...
Let me get a word in.
I very much agree with you, Cora, because I don't see why we should have separation at all. If you have a good intention, there's no need for separation. Once you bring about the idea of separation, there's a bad intention behind it.
Yes.
Well,
see, and the question is, when we go to the classroom, we don't go there. Well, when we go to the classroom, we go there to work with our mentality. It doesn't depend on your background, whether you kill lions with guns or with spears.
But you forget the economic considerations, me. Let us explain this to you.
Okay.
I mean, I know that there's a barrier, but we cannot expect immediate results in a generation or in a limited time. It needs thousands and thousands of years. Just imagine, man passed from the Stone Age to the Nuclear Age after thousands and thousands of years. So we can't expect immediate results. For example, Negroes here in America emerged from slavery. Gradually, they started getting rights. They started playing games. They started singing.
But it didn't take 1,000 years. You said it would take thousands and thousands of years.
But look at the problems you still have, Cora.
Just because.
Well, but talking about this racial relations, I think America is far than South Africa. At any rate, I'm not using this difference to justify America's cause. But
it is quite true that America is... Yes, Forrest?
At least in America, it's against the law to discriminate against a person because of his color. In your case, it is rather considered lawful, isn't it?
Well, I must in the first place mention the fact that what makes the big difference between America and South Africa is the numbers. America has never been faced with a position of giving rights, giving integration, and then being immediately swamped themselves. What you seem to forget is that we have in South Africa approximately 3 million out of a population of 14.5 million. Only 3 million are of European descent.
That's
well,
why
I'm criticizing South Africa, even not because of your form of government or so, but if we consider the fact that South Africa is a member of the United Nations, and you are supposed to believe in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But let's take the question of the Negro in your country. He's socially segregated, politically he's inarticulate, he cannot speak, he cannot express his own opinions, he cannot vote. And then, moreover, he is separated from all the others. So in actual fact, well, that's a complete violation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Welcome back, everybody. The show continues, and we have a special guest who I think, along in the spirit of the show, is not somebody who as much comments on the news as communicates politically in a different way, is a practitioner of the political arts, a filmmaker, a projectionist. And that last part is definitely probably why he's caught your attention in the last year, especially under the Trump administration, the ubiquitous images of unflattering things about Donald Trump put on his hotels, or on very telling things put on the Department of Health, et cetera, has been the work of Robin Bell. So we're really excited to talk to you today, to hear more about your artwork and how you work. And also maybe even hear a little bit about the punk rock days, because of course you and I met when you were a documentary filmmaker documenting the punk scene in your hometown, which is actually something you're contractually obligated to do as someone who's born in a DC hospital. Robin, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
So listen. DC is a company town. It's politics in the same way that, Madison Avenue does whatever, K Street does whatever. And so you, as a filmmaker, as I know, growing up as a filmmaker, you have hustle, you do whatever comes along. But what did being in DC do to push you at political filmmaking, make yourself think yourself as a political filmmaker, or maybe more importantly, think of it as a job one could have? Because that's a question people ask me all the time. Like, how did you become a political filmmaker?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in the water. When I really think about it, I don't think of myself as a political filmmaker. I mean, I do a lot of political filmmaking, and I do a lot of political art. At the same time, I consider myself more an artist and filmmaker. But because DC is, as you say, a company town, the government is one of the biggest things here. But it's also a city where people live. Right now we're in this massive fight for statehood. Because it is a really strange, interesting town. DC is technically like a colony. But people are born here. People do live here. I'll never forget as a kid, people go, "Where are you from?" I go, "Washington, D.C." They're like, "People live there?" I'm like, "Yeah. It's about 600,000 of us. We do these things like live and go to grocery stores and whatnot." But the thing is that being here, especially as an artist and a filmmaker, you document the world that's around you. So, if you have a camera, you're filming stuff, that's what's there. And I think that's what's kind of kept us here, is knowing that depending on what we do, we could actually make the world a better place for people. And I think that's, part of the ethos of not everybody who comes to this city, unfortunately, but for a lot of people who do come. I think that a lot of people come to this city thinking that things are messed up and they want to come here and make a change.
Drain the swamp.
And, you know, it's, oh my God, you know.
Yeah.
Curse?
Yes, you may curse. You may curse a little
yeah.
bit.
Crazy, man. I mean, that honestly, there's some crazy car parked in the garage now with like 3 stickers that say "Drain the Swamp." It's got these like 5 Trump stickers and a Punisher logo.
Yikes.
I'm like, and a QAnon logo, and I'm just going, what the fuck? You know,
it's all
like,
sort of new and scary in a way, but you came of age kind of in a famously contentious Bush years in DC, where the inauguration, the punk movement really showed out. I mean, you know, walk us through that.
Yeah, I mean, we, you know, I think I came of age, like I really came of age doing our work during the Bush years. It's funny enough that, you know, I was trying to figure things out in my early 20s, and I was studying as a printmaker and a printmaker photographer. And I was at a protest.
At the Corcoran, yeah?
Actually, Northern Virginia Community College.
Ah, okay.
Mad props to Northern Virginia Community College. Though I did teach at the Corcoran for 6 years, and I'm now teaching a course at GW. So, community college degree and a little bit of gumption. You know, it's, you know, as a filmmaker, like, you know, people ask you how you do it, and I'd say just do it. You know, experience is key on this stuff. You know, if you're good at shooting, if you're good at editing, or if you're a good storyteller, you know, yeah, you just do it. But it comes from a lot of different skill sets. But yeah, I was studying there, and, you know, I got arrested at this like World Bank IMF protest, just like, you know, snot-nosed kid with a camera. And but I got
early 2000s kids, just so that you remember.
You know, I was illegally arrested. I was completely shocked, and I ended up being part of a class action lawsuit, and we took on the city and the police, and we won. And we actually won a settlement, and that's the money that I used to make a film about punk rock activism that I turned into a benefit film. So if you buy that film, the money goes to the punk rock organization that now feeds senior citizens in the neighborhood.
Positive Force, DC.
Force. Yeah, Positive Force.
Where can people see the film, just while we're thinking about it, so that we're being good stewards of your
Yeah, you can see the film, Positive Force More Than a Witness. You can watch it on Vimeo, which is the preferred way, because you can then kick some money. And otherwise, it is on Amazon Prime as well. So if you are on that, you know,
that's part of your worldview and ecosystem. We don't judge you.
Yeah, it's like, I do know that if you do that like charity thing on Amazon, you can select We Are Family, which is the group, and that will then kick money to We Are Family that basically feeds low income seniors in the Shaw and Columbia Heights neighborhood in Washington D.C. You know, and I think for me, like as a filmmaker, I was, you know, when I was in my early 20s, I had this trajectory where I was trying to figure out my way as an artist. And I thought at that time I'd be designing CD covers and band posters. And so I went to Italy to study printmaking, and, you know, this really cool college where I was learning how to like do like formal prints and whatnot. But I was there during the 2000 election, and I was so upset about how I felt that was stolen. I thought George W. Bush was a real piece of work, and that he was just going to mess things up like he did. But I didn't, you know, being from DC, I didn't want to be, I wanted to live abroad, but I didn't want to be like an angry expat in my 20s. I think it's okay to be an angry expat when you're older, but when you're younger.
In your 40s is when I'd recommend. That's
probably maybe
quite a time.
You know, you've put in your time. I mean, I don't know, like I put in, you know, we've been going 20 years strong doing this kind of work. You know, and you know, the Bush years really were, they prepared us for the Trump years. There's some equivalency, but they're very different. I think that Trump brought us to the brink. I mean, Bush did too, but it was just in a different way. But yeah, so I mean, I think that, you know, we basically have decided to, you know, move back to the States from Italy in the, you know, early 2000. You know, still trying to figure things out. But after September 11th, I honestly, I knew that I had to stay in DC and I had to focus on documenting the world, because I we're at that time period. This is like pre-YouTube, this is pre-Twitter, this is blogs even, and we were doing early kind of independent media where we're trying to figure out the media landscape, and that was kind of the emergence of programs like Final Cut Pro and DV cameras, and we had the ability to make films. We had the ability to really do storytelling.
Suddenly, it was very quick, yeah.
So I feel super lucky to be, still doing that as a practice. In some ways, I'm doing exactly the same thing I was doing 20 years ago. The only thing is, I think we're doing it a little bit better now. We've learned a few lessons on how to be better filmmakers, better artists.
I mean, one of the ways you come by those lessons, and sorry to be this guy, but let's rip the romance off it a little bit, is because so many people, when I talk to them and when they're asking me questions about what I do is what's it like being a political filmmaker, is that it's not all, documentaries about things you believe in. A lot of times you have clients. So working in DC, being a working filmmaker, when it's campaign season, just like if it's Fashion Week in New York, everybody's gonna be doing that. You're gonna be working on ads, coverage, speeches, maybe even speech prep and media training for people who are, it's advertising on steroids. It's, the opposite of sort of artistic creative freedom, even though when you find people who you believe in, obviously it feels good. You get to get into the arena. But just describe that. Don't let me describe it. You describe it.
Yeah, it's all still work. I think for everyone, there's a little, when I first started out, there was this there's a very line between you either work for Republicans or you work for Democrats. I think now there's more of a line where, most people were smart enough not to cross and try to do both. There were some folks who tried to do both, and I don't understand how they could sleep at night. I personally have always, either worked for.
This is more normal in Europe. People will switch from far right to center left groups, just drop of a hat.
Yeah, I don't completely get it. For me, I if anything, I was more Democrat, progressive left, and more progressive left, and figuring out, I think there's the ability to say that there's something wrong, but still try to work with people at a certain level. But honestly, when there's so I think there's a line. There's a line for everybody who's in this work of there's certain gigs I will and I won't take, and that sometimes means I think for us we've had to kind of sometimes go the rougher side up the mountain. One of the reasons I was able to survive was I can film. I'm a decent filmmaker. I can shoot cameras. I can edit. For a long time, that was my.
You can shoot with cameras, not just shoot cameras. I'm telling you, he's multi-talented.
Yeah, it's funny. Where. It's a wild terrain now because, when we first started off, I remember being told, oh, you need to have an Avid system. You can't use Final Cut Pro. You can't use a DV camera. You need to have a big beta camera. Now, if you have a big camera, people are like, oh, but why can't we just do it on our phone?
Yeah.
And, I think that's part of being a practitioner is, it's not straightforward with this work. As you mentioned, it's feast or famine with political season, and then you have the rest of the time. And, also you have a time where things are where people care about an issue, and then people will forget. And I think for me, I've tried to maintain always at least 3 to 5 issues that I'm trying to focus on and try to, build relationships with either clients or people who are passionate about those. So when it comes time to work on them, I can. And I think, a few of
build
them,
a small network of folks who are all kind of pushing a boulder in the same direction and probably are all talking to each other.
Exactly. And I think some of that's team building, and it's building, I think there's sometimes, with any industry, there's people who get worried about scarcity, my whole tactic is we need to figure out ways of working together. How do we stretch the client's money further? How do we stretch the donor's money further? How do we actually win? And that's, and I think that's the one issue that, there's one issue that I'm really passionate about, which is decriminalization of drugs. I grew up in Washington, D.C. When I was a kid, it was the murder capital. There was a lot of people dying from drugs, but mostly from it being illegal.
And
the traffic,
yeah, I mean, in the last 20 years, I've seen real progress. I've seen the decriminalization. I've seen treatment instead of jails. Things that we were told were impossible are actually happening now. And now we're focused on a lot of stuff around immigration and climate change. And those are issues that 5 or 10 years ago, people said, you cannot tackle these issues. These things are impossible. And we're seeing that, there are viable solutions. We don't have it all figured out. But as a filmmaker, as an artist, what I try to do is I try to document things in a way that people who are smarter than me, have a window of how they can maybe figure it out. And it might jar a memory. I think that the hardest thing is if you're looking too closely at things, you don't see them. And I think our job as filmmakers and artists is to look at the situations around us and then figure out how to explain them. I
think a good example of seeing an opportunity and doing that from your own career, if you don't mind my taking you and explaining you back to you, is, besides these things we're talking about, like working on a campaign for an organization you care deeply about or making a documentary about someone you like, there are also other people doing good in all kinds of different various ways. And you are kind of, have been one of the main filmmakers who's worked with famously egalitarian brand Dr. Bronner's soap. What is that like? They are a company. They are, you know what I mean? So it's quite literally advertising. But they're also not. And sort of, it must be sort of a really interesting mix of docu-thinking, ad thinking, political thinking, all mushed up.
I mean, that's a great example, and I think I'm insanely lucky, grateful, and inspired by the work I've done with them.
Plus everybody kind of wants to be able to say, like, I'm the Dr. Bronner's filmmaker. That's sort of like, it's a good card.
I mean, it's insanely amazing. I mean, I watched them grow. I've watched them do amazing work. I was able to document part of they're going fair trade and organic. So I actually went to different parts of the world. I went to Israel and Palestine to film their olive oil. I went to Sri Lanka. We booked the trip when the civil war was still happening, and we were there a week after the ceasefire started to film coconut oil. And that was Sinhalese, Hindi, and Christian and Muslim people and Jewish people all working together to, create fair trade and organic production of coconut oil. And if you look at, those kind of projects, I mean, it's a dream gig. It literally is. It's not easy. You're working with farmers. Being in 100-degree temperature, traveling around the world. It's challenging. At the same time, with their work, they really put their money where their mouth is, and they really they have this really amazing 5-to-1 ratio where the highest paid employee, which would be the president of the company, doesn't make 5 times more than lowest paid employee, which is like maybe someone who's a janitor cleaning up the factory. They really put a lot of their profits. They put their profits towards helping other people out. So, as a filmmaker, my job is how do you explain global production? How do you explain the farming process? How do you explain this conversion in a 5-minute video? And how do you take, especially when you look at farming, which is a project that, it's years of work to create just the one yield, and it's in cycles, and it doesn't fit into like a very cookie cutter thing. And each farm is different. Each people's personal experiences are different. And frankly, each country is different. We started filming this during the Bush years. We were in, being in Israel and Palestine was just we're working with farmers who are on both sides of the wall, and how do you show real world examples of people working together? We interviewed this one amazing gentleman who's a 7-year-old Israeli special forces guy, and he's saying, "Listen, we need to find a way to work together because conflict isn't the answer." And to be able to get to film that, and see, and that's a conflict that people said is impossible. We can't fix that, or it will never be fixed in our lifetime. And I say, well. Maybe not, but we have to work towards it. You have to work towards those goals. So, I think the big thing, for up and coming
people who want to practice this stuff is, really try to connect with projects that fit within what you're trying to do and build relationships. And it takes time, like some of the people I've worked with, they're a great example because I did my first project with them in November of 2001. So we're approaching 20 years. And that first project was literally around, they converted their some of their soap to hemp. And under and right after September 11th, the DEA decided to go after the hemp industry. So if you looked at the DEA website, it put the Taliban on the list of like the worst people, and under it was the hemp industry. And they were basically trying to shut down, like, and you're talking about like stuff that we totally take for granted now, like granola at Whole Foods, with hemp, or soap.
That
so
changed a lot very, very fast. Yeah.
Yeah, and so like the first project I did was literally filming the president of the company, David Bronner, handing out hemp food in front of the DEA location in Arlington, Virginia. And that was fun. That was great. I was able to use my like creative filmmaking, like sitting there with a DV camera doing interviews, watching DEA agents eating hemp food, and be like, okay, yeah, there's no issue. And I think part of that's.
You feel anything yet? What about now?
You're gonna have to eat 3 truckloads, and you're still not gonna feel anything. Yeah. Anyways, it was, So anyways, I've I think that's the best example of that's a very positive group, and that's non-traditional.
What about so how did this morph into becoming sort of a very serious projectionist? It obviously takes investment of equipment to be able to do this, to be able to keep things bright enough and stuff. So it was something you had to have some you can't just sort of fall into it. You have to be thinking about it or not. I don't know. You tell me again.
So the thing with the projection stuff, it's just that it's very similar to like being a filmmaker. It's a lot of different skill sets rolled up into one. I think the reason I'm a good projectionist is because I'm a good filmmaker. It's because I'm a good editor. I'm a good shooter. Also, like, I think I'm a decent storyteller as well. And, with the projections, it's very site-specific installations. So it's like you're converting a building into a story. You're looking at something that pre-exists, but then you're trying to add to it and trying to create a dialogue. And that's a dialogue with the audience, which most of the time is online. It's, you have some interactions on the street. With COVID, there's like very little interactions with people on the street. It's very strange and difficult, but I can't complain considering how rough it has been for everybody.
But it does become more of like a kind of selfie, in that universe of thing, then it becomes like a protest in a way. It's like an individual experience, not a collective action.
I'm a big believer in a culture of resistance or a culture of change. I think that, it's important, I mean, that maybe comes from like seeing the punk rock scene or seeing certain kind of activism or social justice work. It's not just about like a singular moment. It's about kind of an ongoing dialogue. And so, starting out, when the first projectors that I ever used, I literally would go to friends' offices at 5 p.m. on a Friday night and grab these projectors from their offices and then return them Sunday night, Monday morning, crossing my fingers that I didn't break them over the weekend because I couldn't afford that equipment. I mean, that's how with all the stuff when I started out, it was literally, begging and borrowing for everything. I would literally, I started off getting coffee for better filmmakers than me. I would literally ask if there was any kind of help I could do. The first professional filmmaking gig I had was actually working at the National Archives for a researcher, finding footage and recording it onto VHS tapes to send back to editors, and so they could make the proper request of what film to get copied. When you look at the end of the credits of a movie, there's 1,000 names. And when you look, I think, when you start off as an artist or filmmaker, think about how you fit into a history of people who do this work, and that most of the bigger projects that you look up to, it's a team of people. It's never one person. And, just like with the political projection work I do, it's not like I've come up with all these ideas by myself. Some of it comes from just seeing things that have been done before, working with, scientists, organizers, activists, figuring out what are the right messages and then fine tuning it, and saying, okay, if we're putting this on a building, it has definitely a different feel and vibe than if you're writing a blog or if you're in a newspaper or if it's in a film. So it's like, I think that's the biggest advice I always give people is like every project is different. But the bottom line is that you have to take care of the bottom line, which is you have to be nice to people and you have to make sure if it's a gig, you pay the other people and you show up on time, you do the best you can. And I think the biggest thing is understanding strengths and weaknesses and trying to get people to do the best work they can. And I think that's part of that is like being a director, or producer is what you try to do is you try to initially bring in the best people that you have access to and then try to get them into a position that they can do the best work that they can. And, so I think I'm actually like super excited for the next generation of filmmakers. Like we come from the age where we remember analog and we know digital technology. The next generation coming in, there's some things that will be significantly harder for them, but they're not going to be trapped by as much of the dogma of film and analog stuff, which at the same time, there's going to be a loss because there is something very beautiful. And, the beautiful thing about film is you only have, 10 minutes. It's like the difference between writing with pencil or pen. I think that the hardest thing for digital filmmakers now and for the younger people is they can keep editing and never feel like they finish. Versus like at a certain point, you have to finish. And I think that's the one
That's
thing.
what politics teaches us, right? Because there's real deadlines. You can't pussyfoot around forever. It's just, people are going to get at you. And so I think to me, and maybe we'll conclude with this thought because we're coming up on time, but that it is discipline is what you learn as a political filmmaker.
Oh yeah. I mean, just real quick about the projections is like, here's the deal. We have to we have to especially in the Trump years, we were trying to keep, we intentionally said we're not going to be able to keep up with Donald Trump. He's just a madman who just tweets more times in a day than anyone tweets in like a week or a month. But what we did have to do is we had to figure out what he was saying, how are people reacting to it, and create a message and an idea that made sense. And our goal wasn't to troll Donald Trump. Our goal was to help people who were surviving Donald Trump and who were fighting Donald Trump's agenda and the administration's agenda. So coming up with a message, figuring it out as fast as possible, making sure it made sense, it worked within, if it's for myself, I could say whatever I wanted. But if I'm working with the group, it fit within their core values. Getting out there, putting it out there as safe as we can, filming it, photoing it, and getting the images done and edited, and get them out fast. Because, there were times that we would do, a certain projection, and, we had a few that went viral. And, from concept to implementation to documentation to getting it out, it was less than 24 hours. And, the thing is, once you do it, it's in the public sphere. It's out there. So you really do have to, get it done. But at the same time, you have to get it done in a way where you can't take it back. And I think that's the beauty and the challenge.
Your perfect photo in the front of the Washington Post better not have a typo in it because you had the wrong thing on.
Oh my gosh, can you imagine? Or you do a tweet that goes viral and then you realize you misspelled night or whatever word that's out there. Yeah, it can happen. But I think that's the next generation. They're going to be asked to get stuff out there fast, and I think there are certain things that we would be completely embarrassed by, but I think sometimes, so what if it's misspelled? The idea was right. Or so what if it wasn't the most perfect design? Does it convey what it needs to?
Yeah.
But, I think at the end of the day, we're just trying to do
much more disciplined this way than the left.
Yeah. But I'm excited. I think this next time period, we definitely have our work cut out for us. So we're excited to we're continuing to do projections. I'm hoping to sink my teeth into another doc at some point. They take longer though. Projection takes a day or two or a month or
Instant
two.
gratification is one of the things you do get from political filmmaking that you don't necessarily get from the documentary.
5 years. Positive Force took us 5 years, and some people would complain to us and go, "Why did it take so long?" Other people's films take 10 years, 12 years, who knows? But I think the main thing is, and I think this is something that I love about the way that you work, and I think it's something we share, is that there's also just a passion for the process and for doing the work and trying to make it, it is work. At the same time, with the people we work with, we spend a lot of time with them. So how do we make that time period is fruitful and communicative, and learn how to just get better. And I think that's one of the things when I first met you was that your love of cinema, and how your love of cinema then goes into the work that you're doing politically. And I think for me, a lot of what I've tried to bring the art and that kind of storytelling, and bring that into this process, so that there's, frankly, people want to look at it, and I think that's where we sometimes straddle the line between artist and activist, or filmmaker or political filmmaker. And I'm okay with it being vague. I think as long as we can keep doing what we do, try to work with the best people we can, and learn from our mistakes and get even better at what we do. That's my advice to you young filmmakers out there. Just do it.
That is good, wholesome content. And next time you're doing a projection, let us know. Maybe we'll tag along and let the folks see behind the scenes on the show.
Yeah, we'd love to have you.
Bye. Take care now. Accione. Welcome back to the show. This is a segment we are calling Total Campaign Makeover, where we bring progressive campaign experts, the best of the best, and we have them meet people's real campaign problems. And we actually have our very first guest on today, but first I want to introduce today's experts, first of whom is Annie Weinberg. Annie is an election strategist and campaign trainer, candidate trainer par excellence. I mostly know her from her work at Move On and DFA, always being the first person to know the cool kid when it came to any candidate. That's her. She has the first Facebook post with anyone who will become an important member of whatever. And then Fred Guerrier, who is a political filmmaker. He's actually, we talked about this. We actually spent time talking about this. Who is a filmmaker and is working in politics as a filmmaker at Ropeline Media, where he's a partner. And he and I have actually worked together on countless campaigns. We worked together on Bernie Sanders. We even worked with Kamala Harris. We worked with Gabby Giffords. We have sort of run the gauntlet and run the gambit and done the whole thing. And you two have accumulated experience and opinions. So we're going to bring on someone who has problems or things that, and in this case, it's he is thinking about. And so before he comes on, let me just say that Caleb Padgett is a student at Augusta University, and he is an incumbent senator. And so he is seeking re-election. However, his first election, and we'll check the facts with him, et cetera, et cetera. But he won an election in some sort of uncontested manner. I'm not sure if it's he got enough votes to get across the line because a number of people were voted on. I'm going to ask him to describe that right when I bring him on. But he is running again without having run the first time, and that does seem like a sticky wicket, and I think it's interesting, and I think it makes a great knot to untangle. So let's bring on Caleb Padgett. Caleb, hello. And Annie and Fred and I are here to listen, here to learn, and here to help. That's good. I liked all three of those things. That sounded good. You're going to need a slogan that's going to be as good as that on your campaign. Okay. But you heard me describing, is what I described right? You are currently, you are Senator Padgett. I mean, I guess I should address you formally by your title.
I guess I am. It's kind of hard to get, a little silly to get used to. But yeah, so basically what happened was I had seen about student government and I thought, oh, that's interesting. Maybe take a look at that. But I had thought that maybe the deadline was too past, so I'd have to wait a whole other year. But then I overheard a friend of mine talking about how they know the student government president and how they were still looking for senators, that not enough people had run really to fill out the number that they wanted. And so I just contacted them and they're like, oh yeah, awesome. What college are you from? Okay, awesome.
And that's
how I got
Augusta
inaugurated as a
University.
senator.
Can you describe Augusta University a little bit, where you attend?
Yes, so Augusta University, that's its name now. It's gone through a couple recently. It was Augusta State University plus the Medical College of Georgia, which fused together and became Georgia Regents University for a while, for a short time, because everybody hated that name. So now it's just Augusta University. It's a kind of mid-sized university. It's if we're going off sports to indicate size, it is D2 in everything but golf. Golf is the only thing it's like top tier in, sports-wise. It's got the Medical College of Georgia, so it's really important when it comes to that, state-wise, on the state level, when it comes to medical issues and nursing. But that's not what I'm going for, but...
Before we get specifically into what you're worried about in your race, Fred, do you have any questions just about background, or you feel like you got a good vision of the position, or do you want to hear more about his election?
No, I'd like to know like what a senator does, and what you've been doing.
Yes.
In your position.
Position and the power.
Yeah.
Because people are going to vote based on that.
Okay. Yeah. So I have yet to be able to actually look at the Constitution. They haven't sent it out to us yet. But basically, there are three branches, more or less. You have the senators, you have the 4 executive positions, and then you have the justices, which oversee the rules and elections and all that.
But what is the highest thing you
senators-
can hope to do? Is it budget? Like you control a certain amount of money?
Yeah, so basically there are different committees you can be on as a senator, and one of those is the Budget and Allocation Committee, which I'm looking at probably going to be going to that one, on that committee.
Are you currently on any committees at all?
Committees haven't been firmly decided yet because the elections just happened and the semester's about to end, so these are going to be firmly joined in the fall semester.
Got it.
Yeah, so it's tough running without a record and without a legislative season, swallowed up due to COVID. Basically, you are a tired face, facing a fresh electorate. Annie, what do you think?
Yeah.
Oh well, see, I have a couple questions about the election process itself too, and this is really helpful about the role. But I also want to know just a little bit more about you, Caleb, and your political sort of background. Like, what called you to run right now? Was your family pretty political? What can you just share us a little more about that origin story before we
Roger Murdoch.
Well, I've been pretty political from a young age. If we want to go way back, then my earliest political stuff was just kind of parroting whatever my parents said. You know, growing up in a kind of conservative Southern U.S. family, so I was really into yes, McCain, Romney, and those elementary school elections. But then around 5th grade, I discovered
You're younger than we
certain
are.
That was not who I got to vote for.
I was like, Dukakis.
Dukakis. Me too. I remember.
Oh,
and we won.
My
Dukakis
chest
won.
hearing this, but okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, we interrupted. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you're great. But then around 5th grade, I discovered certain kind of liberal, progressive YouTube channels, and then I got really into that kind of politics from there, and I stayed pretty kind of general, kind of liberal, left liberal from 6th grade on to 2016, with kind of staying pretty if the YouTube channels give you any that I watched to give you any indication, the Young Turks and Kyle Kulinski were the main ones. Then 2016, Bernie came about, and so I started kind of seeing myself as a social democrat. Give it another year or two, now I see myself as a communist. So just been that continuous leftward shift.
And that's something we talked about, was you were like, how do I introduce some of my, more left views, and will that be an attraction or turn off in my election? And I do think it's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Oh, we lost our man.
It's such a good question, though. Yeah.
He's a nice kid.
Yeah.
Heads in the
I
right
don't know,
place,
like the whole story of like if he had to argue with his parents, if his parents are moving left with him, I want the whole narrative arc.
And it's, what's interesting is to hear somebody talk about being brought to the left by YouTube, because that's not
Usually
honestly
how it
the
works.
normal story.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Of YouTube. YouTube is you go on there because you heard Christopher Hitchens as a funny anti-God joke, and you end up in Jordan Peterson's fan club, and it takes like a week, right?
All of a sudden, you learn one thing about Elon Musk, and then you're like, wait a minute, now I'm,
Yeah, I just want to know about crypto. Now all of a sudden I'm like, I'm on some pages that I regret.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
I regret my cert.
I'm a founding member of something I don't want to talk about.
Right.
Did you hit stop on us, Jacopo? Because this was gold. All this was gold. I think in the Star Trek universe, it should be like, I don't know what the population of like the galaxy is or whatever, or the quadrant is. But if there's like a couple thousand teleporter accidents, it would A, be terrifying and mean there'd be anti-teleporter people everywhere, and B, not be enough to slow down the galactic economy. There would have to be like that level of acceptance of intolerance of the technology.
Right, because you would just be like deconstituted in space.
It's uploading still somehow?
I do also think...
He's back.
I'm back. I think it was mainly my Wi-Fi that was the problem.
There is our man, Havana. Here he is. Hey.
We got him.
Hi.
All right, Caleb, listen up. When last we were talking, you were telling us about your origin story and some of your lefter views. And I had said that one of the things that you had asked me about was how can and should you express that in your campaign. I'm especially interested from a storytelling standpoint what Fred and Annie think about this. But both being your authentic self and obviously running on what you believe in, because I think we think that matters. But then also sort of not being maybe deliberately provocative. And now I'll back off.
Mm-hmm.
Fred, what do you think?
I'd like to know about like the student body, and in general, I think I agree you should run as yourself and bring your true views to the table. But it also may be an asset that these are people who don't really know what being a communist means, aside from like the scary big C that they've heard, from their parents, perhaps. So maybe it might be an opportunity to teach these kids, some who may be communists without knowing they are. So that might be an asset.
Educational platform. Mm-hmm. What about the student body, Caleb? What are they like?
It's pretty diverse. Augusta's in what's called the CSRA, the Combined Savannah River Area, which it's right near Fort Gordon, which is the head of like U.S. cybersecurity stuff. And so there's a lot of people from all over the country. Like one of my best friends was born in China. Another one of my best friends is German, and he moved here because his dad's a VP of accounting for some company. Very diverse area. And so, yeah, same with the student body. There's a lot of black students, a lot of Asian students. Yeah.
What do you think, to follow up, the word communism means to them? Right? Is this going to come off as sort of like half-assed rebellion, something actually scary, or actually sort of like, ooh, tell me more about that?
I think at the very least, initially, it probably either come off as, Well, of course, it's a very diverse student body, so people would have different reactions. But I think it mainly fall into a couple or a few different camps. Either one, it'd be the oh, communism bad. Spent my entire life hearing about how communism's bad. So and associate with all the stereotypes, all the hyperbolic rhetoric that gets thrown around.
Red
Two,
Scare stuff.
Yes, Red Scare stuff. Another camp that people might fall in is completely associating it with, oh yeah, I have a friend who read A People's History and was really annoying, pointing out everything that's wrong with everything to me.
Everybody's bad college boyfriend or whatever, right? Who's like,
Yes.
no, this is what I'm about, and like, yeah, totally.
Yes, that could be another camp. And then,
or like the longest
I'm not
environmental justice club meeting. Where you're like, this meeting will never. This is just, will we ever? Yeah.
Then, like a third camp, people might fall in. I'm not sure what percentage of people would fall into any of these camps, but the third camp people might fall into is, oh, well, I've heard people like Bernie or AOC talk about socialism, so I know socialism isn't that scary. What about communism? So I'm not sure what the breakdown would be, which people would be in what group, how many would be in what group, but I think those are some groups people would probably fall into were I to be very open and brazen about that identification during the campaign.
Yeah, no, and I mean those two things are different. I think in terms of public consciousness, but no, that for sure is a point well taken. And the one thing I want to say before turning it over to Annie for questions or comments is, seems to me like if you were doing an educational thing, like kind of working backwards from the campaign and sort of rolling out the things you believe in, but in very small ways around, even in the university, whether it be free books, or free public transportation, I don't know if there's a fee associated with something, something that can be universal, right? Not just to benefit people who need it or something that, but something that actually does speak to your values of actual universal benefit, but make it very small and actually sort of lay those things out and sort of be reminiscent of the Milwaukee sewer socialists, who sort of embrace the model of being socialist by being like, and we fix the toilets. Like, who else is going to do that for you?
Yeah.
Annie, what do you think?
Totally. I was going to say, building on this concept of, some of the other political leaders we talked about, right, that both Bernie and AOC are very skillful and intentional about sharing stories rooted in people's actual lives that they're trying to represent, right? They are not the hero of the story in most of the communications that they're doing. They're talking about real humans that live in the district or people that they are working with and building with, and they are the heroes, right? They're the ones that are making choices to improve their lives or the lives of people in communities they love, right? So, thinking about what that looks like for you in terms of what students are dealing with right now, that you would be poised to help. Like, I'm sure it's been an intense and traumatizing time with COVID everywhere. I don't actually know if your campus was open or closed or if it was doing both, right?
A mix of the both.
Yeah. Which is also interesting because this next election, if was the last election, everybody was remote, and this one, people will actually be back in the same physical space.
Yeah, so last one, voting was online, but I think you were able to kind of do some limited events in person to kind of drum up interest, but the actual voting was completely online.
Okay.
I mean, to build on what Annie's saying, I think it would be cool to associate a character who's a real person. I'm just an obnoxious person who says character. Fred does it too. He uses character for real people occasionally. But like, so it's not you, it's not the Caleb show. It's like, hey, we're going to talk about like minimum, what can the university offer as a minimum wage, and actually want you to meet, this janitor who you all know. And actually, did you know that they're living on this amount of money? The university, this is a great school. There's no reason why we can't afford better than that.
Right.
Yeah. Sounds awesome.
Or like expanding scholarship, like looking at scholarship funding or Pell Grant, how they administer funds or
how they're
programs.
funded is really interesting, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there are campaigns.
Totally. And I think,
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's why I'm really interested to actually. They haven't sent out the actual constitution yet of the student government, so
I love that. Flying
I'm
blind.
really waiting for that. You know?
Yeah.
Really excited for that to actually be able to actually see what I'm working with from that. Because when I actually went to the website for student government, like it was sparse. Like it still had even.
Oh, now there's an emperor. I wonder what that person does in relation to the Senate.
Wait a minute.
Huh.
Primus inter pares.
Yeah. This new constitution's strange. Yeah. What are some of the things you'd want to do? Sorry, Fred, I interrupted you.
No, that was a question I was asking. Like, what are you hoping to do?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, anything I'd say here would just be, kind of work in progress ideas, because I haven't really had the chance to
bounce them off. We'll tell you if they're sticky.
Bounce them off, or to gauge a lot of interest within the wider student body for these ideas. But I'm personally looking for a job at the university to maybe like tutor or whatever. So maybe a minimum wage for that if students are looking to either do like some receptionist work at the school in order to make some extra money, or to tutor at the school, maybe have a base minimum wage for that.
So more employment at a certain wage offered by the university as a point of order.
Yeah, see, that's certainly an idea. I've heard a lot of my colleague senators talk about transportation fees and parking as an issue that has gotten them.
I like that, actually. I feel like that's got legs.
What else? One of my colleague senators has talked about just completely revamping the way that certain programs are funded in the first place by student government. Certain clubs and things are funded, just revamping that entirely, which I haven't really had a chance to listen to him go in more in depth as to what he meant by that, but that's certainly a possibility. Right now I'm just open to hearing any and all ideas, because
I've got a couple more too. Yeah.
Me too. I got a couple more.
I don't want to take anyone else's time though. Does anyone else have something they want to say?
Yeah. I have a question, both logistical and strategic, which is just to get the lay of the land. Is there a relationship between the student government and the faculty? How do professors and teachers interact with the student government? And are there things, campuses are the hub of a lot of different kinds of organizing around justice-focused and expansive curriculum, and around TAs and labor rights and workers' rights. Like, what are the faculty thinking about and organizing on as well? So those are sort of two different questions.
It's interesting because it's an interesting triangle, isn't it, between administration, faculty, and students? It's a real feudal system.
And everybody else that works at the school, right? All the genders and people who work in the cafeteria, everybody, as well. But.
Yeah, so when it comes to the actual order of hierarchy, you have the university itself at the very top, obviously, administration and all that. Then underneath that, you have three different, you have student government, you have president's cabinet, and you have the staff and faculty council. And I haven't been able to become really familiar with certain faculty-student government interactions yet. I was just inaugurated a few weeks ago, but I think certainly there is a close relationship, or there should be a closer relationship, working relationship, because as the student government president said a week or two ago when we were having a student government meeting, we're kind of the ones that are the reasons why the university exists in the first place. No university if there aren't students.
Right, you're not customers. I think that's sort of the line that sometimes it gets straddled as in education.
Mm-hmm.
the more I'm listening to you, the more I feel like you shouldn't worry about the incumbent thing really at all. And it's just like, there was some weird thing, I'm running for this thing. I don't think it's going to even play into it. I think it's just about what you believe and what you want.
Yeah, and I think all about just using the thing that you think is going to be your crutch as an asset. Like, you were interested enough to join the student government. That gives you a leg up. I think that's part of the narrative you want to go with, right?
Huh. Yeah.
And so I'm an incumbent because I was interested enough to serve on this body. In this body.
Yeah, you may not know it, but I actually am a sitting senator because I actually gave a crap enough to sign up, and not enough people did. But let's get serious and get something done.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
I also want you to get a Google Voice number or something and put things up around campus where people can just complain about things.
Ooh,
and
that's
then
a good one.
And then take the best complaints and you can make them into anonymous tweets or whatever, or even collect the audio, make like a little audio, slideshow kind of thing of gripes about campus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, specificity is always going to be good, right? Like a specific problem, a specific issue that you want to focus on. So it's
whatever,
not
like
big
issue,
labels, but like
rolling out the
specific.
issue.
Right.
Yeah, what's wrong with the bus system on campus? Like, let us have it.
Right.
Not let us have it. You say let them have it. That's what I mean about the incumbent thing. I think you say let the university have it. I don't think you take ownership of that. I don't think you take ownership of it.
Yeah. And I would love to know
Mr. Senator.
what Arun and Fred think about it, but it sounds like you're also in a phase where a sort of deep listening drive would be helpful. So what you're saying with the Google Voice could be part of it, but also
active listening.
Yeah, that you are trying to ask a big number of people and constituencies on campus, what do you want to see the student body, the student government fighting for, and what could we change that would make your experience that much better or easier or more meaningful at Augusta, right? You can workshop the actual way that you ask the question, but I don't know if there's a Greek system on campus, but I bet the answers of the folks that are a big part of that might be different from the folks that are part of different clubs and communities, right? I think some of that deep listening plus a little bit of a map of who is there on the campus and part of that community of your stakeholders,
Yeah. No, I want to build on that because that's very smart. I couldn't agree more. And I think in an election where the margins are not going to be big, in which you just need getting small pools of people who otherwise wouldn't participate because you've talked about their pet issue is the easiest way to actually jump several points ahead. And this is actually something that all candidates can learn from, which is that I have a complex worldview. It's nobody cares. People care about one thing that's the most important thing to them. They're going to vote on it. Somebody can't afford college. Somebody just had a heart attack. There's a reason why healthcare and education score so highly. Somebody really cares about guns because of gun violence in their family. There's something that makes somebody care about an issue. And sometimes it's not that. Sometimes it's diabetes, single issue voting. It's, veganism. It's animal people. Animal people are the best example. Talking about the Dutch elections where you have an actual whole animal party. Where animal people stick together and they vote on one thing, animals. I dragged a Texas candidate on our way to something to a shelter, and he didn't like cats, but he liked dogs. Okay, they had no dogs, and he was like, I don't want to pose with a cat. And I was like, you just got to do this. And as if fate itself wanted to prove me right, the very first comment on the Facebook post, with him cuddling with his cat at the ASPCA or whatever it was I'm a Republican and I'm voting for you because you give a crap about animals and that. And I've never heard your opponent say one word. And that's it. So so if you, as Annie says, map out some of these issues on campus, and it will be food, and it will be bikes, and it will be things like that, you can get pockets of people who otherwise couldn't give a crap about a student election, but will walk through glass if it's something to do with bikes.
Yeah.
And they believe you, and they trust you, that you're going to do the thing that you said you would do.
Because you were there talking about their issue. It was not just, And at campus, it's easy because there's a million clubs. You just look them up. You make your list, and you're like, okay, what is this? All right, do you mind if I come speak at your club? They're thrilled. And now it's easy because it's a Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
That's true.
Do 5 of those a night. Can you imagine, Fred? You know, we used to do 5 states a day, and that was a huge pain in the ass.
Let's do 5 calls. Yeah.
Yeah, 5 calls. This is better. All right. Well, thank you so much. We are running out. We're out of time a couple minutes ago, but we enjoyed talking to you. And when will be a good time to check in to see how it's going? Maybe like midwinter?
Let's see. Well, the actual next elections, I think, are just going to be next spring, because I think...
It's not going to be till spring, right?
Yeah,
so you don't have to really start thinking about things until the winter, right?
Yeah, because I think I'm incumbent until next spring, yeah.
Yeah, so what you got to do between now, and I'll give everybody a last word before, we all totally cut out. But what you got to do between then and now is do this mapping and do this listening and do this hanging out with folks, because you're maybe thinking about, because you are a sitting senator, and you're like, I feel like I should know the school better. You have a reason to be places, and you're not really running for anything right now, so it's not like this guy's just doing it to get 10 votes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, get those little pockets of votes, and then when it actually becomes go time, you've got like a network of single-issue voters activated. All right, last word, Fred or Annie, what do you think?
I just think that that plan you just laid out is totally right, and it'll also help you clarify your priorities and what you want to fight for, given the values that you talked about.
That's true.
And because you're going to hear some things that you're like, I don't actually want to do that, right? There's going to be some things that you're like, I oppose that, as you're doing some of that listening, and that also will be clarifying for you about what the stakes are and the different vision that you're putting forth. So I feel like it's that phase now of that deep active listening and that sort of mapping of the power and the constituencies on your campus. And then the next phase will be sort of the priorities that you can then legitimately say that you got from them, right? It came from the people of what you're going to fight for and build in Augusta. But good luck.
Based on what you heard, Fred, and you can answer a different question if you'd prefer, but do you have any ideas about some of the content that he might use when it is runtime, or does your director's mind jump at anything?
Well, initially, when you mentioned that you were communist and you weren't sure how that was going to land, I was thinking, yeah, maybe use that. Like, I'm a communist and this is what I can do. Like, get, general big C communist, but then I do this very specific thing for you, right? Or like, tell them what a communist is, but like very, very simple, small, specific things, like incorporating what Arun and Annie were saying. Just like, if you want to get funny with it, get the hat, get the mustache, but say like, you're going to do these very specific things that's going to make people's lives better. But I'm a communist, big, scary communist, but I do these things.
Yeah, maybe have like a flyer or something like, I'm a communist, and for me that means community.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah.
It will get attention.
It's Cyrillic.
It will. It will.
Yeah.
It will get attention.
Just all bright red.
All right. Thank you again, Caleb, and we will follow up with you for sure. And Annie, Fred, really nice to see you.
Yeah.
And thanks for coming on the inaugural edition of Total Campaign Makeover. Yeah. And I hope we can have you back on sometime.
I'd love that.
Thanks.
Good luck, Caleb.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you all.
Thanks, y'all.
Rita, you've told us what your feeling about the future is. What's your feeling about the future in South Africa, Nee?
Well, you see, I consider this whole problem as a very serious one. At the moment, this is one of the most crucial problems in the world confronting our generation. And in fact, it's second only to the problem of war and peace. But unfortunately, it is very closely related to it. You see, the problem is very, very serious. First of all, in order to solve this problem, I believe that the white man must come to his senses. He must swallow his pride, you see. This whole thing is based on just foolish ideology. I mean, this question of color, using color as a basis of superiority or inferiority. You see, the whole thing is foolish, and, well, either the white man swallows his pride and avoids what is inevitable and tries to live with the Negro peacefully, or, well, if, as I've said, the Negro is politically inarticulate, he doesn't vote.
What stand do you think that the South African government should take?
Of course, you abolish your policy. I mean,
and what follows then?
And live peacefully with the Negroes.
And live peacefully with the Negroes.
Yes.
And be completely swamped, lose everything for which they had been fought, as be drawn down to by the mere numbers, be swamped, and lose their own culture, and you have forgotten that South Africa has become very important economically. we have quite a lot to offer the rest of Africa already. We've become the biggest exports of consumer goods towards other African states south of the Sahara.
Well, I quite agree with you there, you see, but look at this point. The problem was brought about by the white man. You started to discriminate against the Negro. So, well, we depend on the white man to solve the problem. After all, the Negro is powerless in your community, in your society. The Negro is powerless. He hasn't got any political rights.
In our own society, yes?
You see, the only alternative would be that the Negro would take to violence. In Kenya, we had the same thing. When people took to violence, we took the form of the Mau organization.
Well, in Kenya, there's a difference in population too. You must take that into consideration. There are so many Africans and so few white people.
I'm sorry, this is all the time we've got. We obviously must come back in another discussion to the question of the future in Africa, not only in South Africa, but the tremendously revolutionary movements that are going on in Africa today, and we're going to have to come back to that in another discussion. I just thought, in the few seconds that are left, I ought to call the audience's attention to the fact that quite a number of these discussions are being printed verbatim in scholastic magazines. Also, Scholastic Teacher calls attention to it in the February 6th issue of Scholastic Magazines. For example, there is a verbatim report of this show you were on, Nee. Wait, I've got the wrong... Where are we? Here we are. The show on the image of America abroad. There's Nee right there. And several of these will be printed verbatim in successive issues of Scholastic Magazines. This one is the Senior Scholastic of February 6th. I think the next one that will be printed verbatim is on our discussion on education. But I promise you that we will have another discussion on the future in Africa.
Oh, hey, I didn't see you there. I didn't realize you all were still here. You know, it's getting late in Berlin, and so we're going to end the show. I mean, we did a lot of stuff today, and we learned a lot of things, and after a busy day like that, I like to actually settle down with some important readings from a good book, and then to get to sleep. Why don't you join me? And then I hope you'll join us again next week for another committee program where we will get to the bottom of stuff, dig some other stuff up, and mess around with some other things. This reading today was suggested to us by our own Julia Doubleday, and is an excerpt from Public Power in the Age of Empire by Arundhati Roy. Is it better for the world to have a smarter emperor in power or a stupider one? Is that our only choice? I'm sorry, I know these are uncomfortable, even brutal questions, but they must be asked. The fact is that electoral democracy has become a process of cynical manipulation. It offers us a very reduced political space today. To believe this space constitutes real choice would be very naive. The crisis in modern democracy is a profound one. Free elections, a free press, and an independent judiciary mean little when the free market has reduced them to commodities available on sale to the highest bidder. On the global stage, beyond the jurisdiction of sovereign governments, international instruments of trade and finance oversee a complex system of multilateral laws and agreements that have entrenched a system of appropriation that puts colonialism to shame. This system allows the unrestricted entry and exit of massive amounts of speculative capital, into and out of third world countries, which then effectively dictates their economic policy. Using a threat of capital flight as a lever, international capital insinuates itself deeper and deeper into these economies. Giant transnational corporations are taking control of their essential infrastructure and natural resources, their minerals, their water, their electricity. The World Trade Organization, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and other financial institutions like the Asian Development Bank virtually write economic policy and parliamentary legislation. With a deadly combination of arrogance and ruthlessness, they take their sledgehammers to fragile, interdependent, historically complex societies and devastate them. All this goes under the fluttering banner of reform. As a consequence of this reform, Africa, Asia, and Latin America, thousands of small enterprises and industries have closed down. Millions of workers and farmers have lost their jobs and land. Anyone who criticizes this process is mocked for being, quote, anti-reform
anti-progress, anti-development, somehow a Luddite. Once the economies of third world countries are controlled by the free market, they are enmeshed in an elaborate, carefully calibrated system of economic inequality. For example, Western countries that spend more than $1 billion a day on subsidies to farmers demand that poor countries withdraw all agricultural subsidies, including subsidized electricity. Then they flood the markets of poor countries with their subsidized agricultural goods and other products which local producers can possibly compete. Countries that have been plundered by colonizing regimes are steeped in debt to those same powers and have to repay them at a rate of about $382 billion a year. Ergo, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. Not accidentally, but by design, by intention. The thing to understand is that modern democracy is safely premised on an almost religious acceptance of the nation state. But corporate globalization is not. Liquid capital is not. So even though capital needs the coercive powers of the nation state to put down revolts and servants' quarters, this setup ensures that no individual nation can oppose corporate globalization on its own. And I think that's the point, on its own. I hope through programs like this and through other international activities, we do develop a stronger bond of international solidarity on the left, because there is no doubt that that solidarity exists among corporations, exists amongst the far right, and exists amongst those who would deny us our basic humanity and planetary safety. So, with those cheery words, I bid you a good night, and I hope to see you next time.